Hello, everybody, wake the hell up. The ritual is starting.
It certainly freaking has. I'm really looking forward to this one. I am an enormous fan of Verminlords, much more so than you might expect. And if you've watched any of the old Lawhammer streams, you'll know that I do like a Skaven or two. But Verminlords in particular have always been a topic that particularly fascinates me.
Before you get going, let's make sure that everyone can see and hear us before you start.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, if we could just get some confirmation, everyone, that you can see and hear us, that would be great. Over on Twitch and YouTube, that would be wonderful. We do hope you're all having a wonderful day. Just because I could tell Andy was about to, like, he was in that preamble to start going into the intro. It's like, wait, slow down. Okay, yeah, we're looking good. We're looking good. All right, so now go ahead.
So, before I dive into my intro, the typical opening, inevitably there'll be a bunch of lovely super chats. Thank you very much. You all rock. We'll be taking those in batches as we go along. The subject today, of course, is Verminlords, those enormous demons of the Horned Rat. Skaven's worst nightmare and arguably bestest allies? Sure. Look into my eyes! Yeah, no. I'm really looking forward to this one, as I said, because, well, I've painted a few of these bad boys in my time, and I do like them. Do you have anything that you'd like to add before I dive into an intro? Mr. Loremaster of Sotek.
Yeah, the only quick things I'll add is that as we're talking, if y'all could let us know if the audio levels are good, just because we had some technical weirdness happen both on his side and on my side over the last week. Hello.
Passing Lindsay before she heads to the gym.
So just let us know about that. Just because, like, I had a lightning bolt hit my house and knocked the power out for a little bit, so that was fun. And
all the power went out in most of Edinburgh over the weekend, just at the beginning, and it was candle time here in Edinburgh. And if you were in my stream, my Q&A that I had on Saturday, you'll note that I had no sound at all for a good 2 minutes of that one.
Okay, everything sounds good. Great. Awesome. The only other things, just so you put it on your calendar, if you can't stay with us for the entire stream of that, on Wednesday, we do have a stream planned. We're going to be doing a tier list ranking for the provinces of the Empire, which is going to be really fun. We're really looking forward to that.
And hard.
Yeah, that is going to be difficult.
So hard. Yeah.
But if you want to learn a lot about the various provinces, that'll be a good stream to show up to as we talk shit about all of them. So it'll be even more fun than normal. And then we will, by the end of this stream, reveal what the next Sunday's Lorebeards is going to be. But that'll be at the end of the stream.
Yep, certainly will. I'm looking forward to that a lot.
And we super totally purposely we're so good at this. We're so good at planning and scheduling. We deliberately tricked y'all into voting for Verminlords on preparation for the Great Horned Rat Week for Lawhammer. We're just that good.
A massive fluke. For those of you who don't follow the Lawhammer streams, where we're making our way through the Enemy Within campaign in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, we're just starting the Horned Rat, which is the big Skaven section of the campaign, and this stream could not be better timed if it tried. So thanks very much for voting this one on. This wasn't planned. This was 100% fluke, but it does perfectly marry together with the other. So are we ready to have ourselves a fun intro?
Yep, let's get into it.
All right, so if we go by classic lore, the Verminlord, the greater demon of the Horned Rat, made its first debut in Warhammer all the way back in, I'm going to say 1993, with the first Skaven army list for 4th edition. But that's not true. It is the first place where the Verminlord was called out as a Verminlord, but it is not the first time when we had the greater demon of the Skaven. For that, we need to go back all the way to 1989. Now, in 1989, we are in the 3rd edition of Warhammer, and we're in the 1st edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and they're both new games. Warhammer is very much a thing. It has started, and the Skaven are one of the key races of Warhammer because they're new and they are unique. Unlike most of Warhammer's offering at the time, which were nothing more than various fantasy or real-world species, races, factions, whatever you wish to call them, reinterpreted ever so slightly scrubbing off various barcodes and copyright messages to say, no, these are definitely not from Lord of the Rings or Michael Moorcock or anything similar. These are ours. This is cool. The Skaven were entirely unique and something that was utterly their own. And during this era, Games Workshop made a deal with a company called MB Games. And they made a game called Hero Quest. And if you've seen Hero Quest, best game ever, lots of fun. That was a publicly released game that went everywhere. And then Games Workshop made their own version, a more advanced version of the game, which they somewhat, let's say, cleverly called Advanced Hero Quest. Yeah. Cunning
so you're
name.
saying Games Workshop has always been that good at naming things?
Oh yeah, it's a good time. Now, I obviously was buying these games back at during that era because me and I've been playing these games for altogether too long. And this is the first place where we get ourselves a true, unique, effectively greater demon of the Horned Rat. And back then, as I recall, it's called Prasnagar. And
That's
Prasnagar
correct.
is the great demon that the Skaven has had. There's a big, long plot here. But let's not go into it. All that matters for the moment is that we have ourselves the concept of a greater demon of the Skaven introduced inside Advanced Hero Quest. And this is relatively unique, but not that surprising, because if you move over to the Realms of Chaos books that had just very recently come out, the concept of demons for all the minor chaos gods, which the Horned Rat is very much pitched as this point. It's a minor chaos god. The greater demons and lesser demons and steeds and mounts and all sorts of stuff are par for the course. So the greater demon of the Horned Rat is not a surprise. Fans at the time were like, oh, that's quite an interesting thing. I might go make up my own. Because indeed, inside the rules for the Realms of Chaos books, there was a whole set of creation rules for making your own demons and gods. One of the most famous examples of which is actually in that book called Quethel Grizzlegut. And he's effectively another Verminlord in some respect. He isn't. He's basically a gigantic god that they just used and created out of a Skaven just to show you how the rules worked. So from there, we then move to 1993 when the Skaven army list comes out for Warhammer 4th edition. And all of the previous lore, the vague, well, it's a chaosy god thing, the Horned Rat, kinda, sorta, is then reinterpreted and re-envisioned by Andy Chambers when he writes the Skaven army list. And in the Skaven army list, we have our first clear Verminlord. And the Verminlord is not the Verminlord that we have today. It's part of the story, because the Verminlord that we get in 4th edition is, let's put it simply, an ascended Skaven. All of them. At this era, it is nothing more than a Skaven that has done so much awesome inside the mortal plane that the Horned Rat goes, yup, I like you, and then ascends him as, effectively, a demon prince of the Horned Rat. So the Verminlords, at this point, are initially pitched as demon princes of the Horned Rat. And they are the worst or best, depending on your description, examples of Skavendom that have been raised up and turned into something immortal in what will become later known as the Realm of Ruin, which is the realm of the Horned Rat over on the other side in the Aether. And depending on your edition, they have different ways of attempting to explain that particular place. So that gives us our Verminlords. This our first greater demons of, well, demon princes, really, of the Horned Rat. And as the edition moves on to 5th, Skaven don't get an army list, and we hit 6th, and we're like, well, what are they going to turn them into? For those of you out there who know the 6th edition, they basically recalibrated all of Warhammer completely and added an awful lot of relatively new detail, made it a bit grimmer, took away the cartoonish aspects that had been creeping into the set for a while, and they were gone. No Verminlord. Dropped. And I remember this time keenly, because I had a Verminlord model in my Skaven army, because I freaking loved that first model. It wasn't that great. It was much like the old metal Greater Demon models that you got in the late 80s and the early 90s. And it was a big, huge glaive that it was carrying with a curly horned piece of fun. And I was like, oh, well, toss. That's useless. And then along came 7th edition. And then when we hit 7th edition, our Verminlords are updated, this time, as I recall, by Jeremy Vettok. And our Verminlords are changed completely from being exalted champions that are ascended and have become demon princes to demons of the Horned Rat directly. So in the 6th edition, we now have ourselves the Horned Rat as a god and demons of the Horned Rat that are the perfect manifestations of everything that is to be the Horned Rat. And these are summoned by Grey Seers, often with great terror in their hearts, because they don't really want to do it because Verminlords are scary, as we're going to cover. And they are brought forth onto the battlefield, and now we have nothing more than what is effectively the equivalent of a Keeper of Secrets, or a Great Unclean One, or a Bloodthirster, or indeed a Feathered Lord, a good changer of the ways from good old Tzeentch. Greater Demons of the Horned Rat. That's basically what they're now repitched as. And this is what a horned, massive Verminlord is. Come 8th edition, the Skaven didn't even get a proper army list. So they didn't get an update at all. And that is where many people think it sort of cuts off. But holy cremolians, does it get a bit of an update after that. Because we then move and deep dive into the end times. And before we do this, it's also worth noting that a bunch of small novels use Verminlords in a variety of ways. I say small novels, they're huge epics in their own way. A bunch of side novels might be better because generally the lore is considered to be what happens inside the battle game. And then the end times came and they went, you know, Verminlords. Well, how they were described in 4th edition
we're going
correct.
Yeah.
How they were described in 6th edition is correct. In fact, Verminlords are nothing more than a shadowy council of 13 on the other side, and a whole bunch of other demons too. Yeah! And they go a bit wild. And they effectively create a bunch of extra Verminlord types. We'll be going into that later. And they give a whole bunch of new characters, which are Verminlords, which we'll be going into later as well. And they completely broaden it. But interestingly, don't broaden it too much, because they were basically running off one model, which they gave lots of variations of, and they said, this model can be used as this, or this. Different types of Verminlord. And it's fair to say it was a complete waste of time. Now, that might sound relatively controversial for me in an end times comment, but the reason I say it's a bit of a waste of time is because they put pages and pages of information into effectively the same model, which could easily have just been one set of stats with a couple of options. Different types of Verminlords and how you could use them. But they just filled it up with, I'm going to say it, page filler. As they describe what each one of the different Verminlord types can do, which is basically, they could do this spell, they could do that spell, they're a bit cunning, they're a bit this. They really add almost no core detail.
Yeah,
but they do add a lot of characters.
Yeah, the thing they really went ham on, which was... It was a fun way to try and be like, let's just stuff a bunch of extra bits in this kit. Though I agree with Andy where it would have made a lot more sense just to make the characters a lot more. Actually, though, I have a theory why they did it. But Andy's right in that, if you were looking at like a 6th, 7th, or 8th edition perspective, and they were selling that model, it would have just been like
single
upgrades.
Entry. Yeah.
Where you can because what they did is they themed a bunch of them after different clans. Where it's like, oh, here's the Clan Eshin looking one, here's the Clan Pestilence one, here's the Warlord clan one, here's the kind of Grey Seer Clan Scryry type one, which is like, okay, cool, fine. But I suspect the reason why they did what they did was that going into Age of Sigmar, which is what all of the End Times new models were being designed for, was they were being designed for AOS, not for Fantasy. And in AOS, you cannot take upgrades. Every version of the model that's different has a different entry. And that's what they did. Instead of making it where it's like, oh, you can take like all these different upgrades, they were like, no, we're going to make each version its own, like it has a unique name, it has a unique like gimmick and all this stuff, and it's because it was building it for AOS.
Indeed, and I was going to say pretty much exactly that. And it didn't make a great deal of sense at the time, because I remember when this book was released also, I remember going through it going, oh, cool, they've put some extra bits in. There's another page. This is interesting. This is not really adding anything. There's another page. Okay, this is another type. And they're basically now just re-describing the clans of the Skaven, rather than necessarily adding great detail for each one of these characters. And I remember at the time going, This feels like filler. And it wouldn't be until Age of Sigmar came along and we saw how Age of Sigmar was handling its various characters and its various units that it all began to make sense. It was almost like the proto-nascent version of what was to come, where they took each one and gave it its own scroll of power. This is how this works. This is how this works. This is how this works. And you could see the thinking beginning to germinate here for what would eventually become Age of Sigmar. Now, for the old Warhammer fans, that was nothing more than a dark betrayal, but not until, obviously, Age of Sigmar arrived and they realized. But for everyone else, it was just an interesting insight into seeing how the studio was moving from one way of presenting information into a new way. And that brings us up to finally today, where Verminlords are part and parcel of the Skaven. They are behind the scenes doing all sorts of stuff. We're going to discuss exactly who they are, what they are, how they manifest differently, but it's worth noting that a significant amount of this is going to be somewhat, I'd almost say controversially for us, heavily relying on end times material. Because the core of what the Verminlords become is very much grounded in the Thankwall books, book 2 in particular, where they go into depths about the different Verminlords. So that's a good chunk of book 1 as well, just in terms of the overall detail. And the stories are arguably much less important here, given the nature of the stream, than the actual nature of the Verminlords that they present, because they dial it right back in time. They give ourselves a couple of really cool Verminlord characters, and they also discuss different types of Verminlords and what they are. So, to finish off my long preamble, we have ourselves Greater Demons of the Horned Rat, and interestingly pitched in a fashion that, unlike all the other minor Chaos Gods, which are generally given a variety of demons, they have always, because the Skaven in some respects here have been on this side, never really supported the whole concept of that being a minor Chaos God with models. They only went with one. Now, it might have been a kit with options, but it was still one. And of course, Forge World and Exalted option, but nevertheless, one. We didn't get a greater demon, a lesser demon, a steed, various manifestations of how demons can effectively come from the realm of ruin into the real world. We were just given masterminds, which to a degree works quite well with the Skaven, but equally when you think of the Skaven as a whole, you do feel like there's a big gaping hole in the demonic pantheon of what the Verminlords and probably have beneath them. But that's for another day, perhaps, if we were to ever discuss other things that Skaven could have.
I'm going to dive into that later. I've got a plan for that. We're going to dive into that later. But,
okay, good to hear. So there's our preamble. Where shall we begin?
We're going to begin with Super Chats, where we're going to begin.
All right, sounds good.
All right, Magladraw, thank you very much. Heretical idea. Are there potentially other Skaven gods out there? Or would Verminlords fill the same space as demon princes in the Pantheon? So, like Andy kind of said, the way Warhammer presents it in the earlier editions and then in the later editions is that they're literally demon princes. Like, full on. Just, boom, demon princes. Sotek is a bit louder than Andy. Do you want to are you able to bring yourself up? Do you want me to bring myself down?
I can bring myself up a bit. Let me just go grab that. Let's and everyone can tell me if it does. There we go. I should be a little bit louder now. How's that?
Okay, let me know if that's better, guys.
Has that made any difference? Am I louder? Is it about equal?
Yeah, it sounds better to me. But we'll see what the chat says. But that being said, the idea that there could be other Skaven gods out there, one of the things that is interesting is that one of the things that's interesting within the Skaven lore itself, and me and Andy talked about this if you go back and watch our episode on Lord Scroll, is there is a suggestion of an idea that there are two different Great Horned Rats, being the one that Clan's Pestilence worships and the one that the rest of the Skaven worship, like the Gracer clan, which me and Andy talked a lot about. I would suggest that they are the same entity, but if you're exploring the lore yourself, you can actually find some suggestions within the universe itself that there are some who believe that they are different entities, which can add some interesting places for you to explore, particularly the Graciers. A lot of the Graciers actually lean heavily on the idea that the version that the Pestilence worships is not actually part of the Great Horned Rat, but is like this other thing. But that's more of a political position, necessarily than what they strictly believe theologically. So, but you can have a lot of fun exploring that because there's some interesting wiggle room there.
Yeah, the Skaven are full of conspiracy theories, so the idea that there would be multiple potential manifestations of what the Horned Rat is, or that we're all being tricked, is no great surprise. In terms of the core lore, as in, what would you do if you were writing this? There's just the Horned Rat, and he loves all those schemes and those conspiracy theories and everything else. He is the god of corruption, ruin, disease, pestilence, a variety of scheming tricks. Basically, he's almost all of the Chaos Gods wrapped into one in a weird fashion, but he definitely strongly espouses Tzeentch and Nurgle-esque tones. As for the core of the question itself, which has now just fled my mind because it vanished off the screen.
There's Skaven gods.
Oh, yes. Originally, the answer would probably have been yes, there were. So we're talking all the way back in 3rd edition, where the Horned Rat would have been the primary deity and there would have been others. I would argue strongly that is definitely not the case now in any way, shape, or form, and that the pantheon is instead a pantheon of Verminlords, core important Verminlords, many of which will be working directly into the material realm with their own schemes, some of which were demon princes, some of which are nothing more than greater demons of the Horned Rat itself.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll note is that there are some notes within the lore, and Age of Sigmar has been really strengthening on this, that there are Skaven that end up worshiping other gods, like they worship like the other members of the Chaos Pantheon, like they can be corrupted by Slaanesh or Tzeentch or Khorne or whatever. That's something Age of Sigmar has been leaning much more heavily into, which tends to reflect backwards into the setting. So if you want to play around with there being Skaven that worship other gods, that is certainly something that would probably be completely fair to play around with. Captain Magma, can't make the stream, so I'm dropping this question. Is it possible that there's an etheric under-empire that could be considered underneath the realms of the other deities, whatever can be ascribed to under in the ether? Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what the realm of ruin is, where the Great Horned Rat hangs out. His domain. Once again, you kind of start getting into a weird thing of like how space would work within the ether as far as like what direction anything is in, would, get into brain breaking, but I think you could definitely run with that idea and it wouldn't be that much of a stretch.
Yeah, absolutely. The realm of chaos, the aether, the other side, the divine realms, whatever you want to call it, that which lies beyond the veil, a very popular 7th edition phrase, is weird. Pretty much anything that you wish to put over there, you kind of can. It's a realm that's both infinite and timeless, yet also ticks along at its own weird rate. And the realm of ruin absolutely is pretty much the etheric equivalent of the Under Empire, with its own etheric Council of 13 as well.
Yeah, and this also leans, once again, because we'll be talking a fair bit about this, that this also leans into Age of Sigmar, where the realm of ruin quite literally ends up sinking to the bottom of the ether or the realm of chaos because of some shenanigans the Skaven get up to, being that they literally knock themselves down in it and then they set about burrowing holes through the ether, eating their way through the ether, which lets them pop up in all sorts of weird places in material reality, which supports that idea. So, like I said, not a big stretch. Darius Rose, meant to ask you this during the Call stream, but forgot. Is it possible for an asexual character to work as a Slaanesh champion, perhaps even one of the greatest? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Slaanesh is not sex. Slaanesh is excess. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Godzilla. So, the Horned Rat can create or send his minions into his own version of demon princes, but Hatchet has not. Why is that? That's a great question, first of all. Second of all, if you go back to our Hatchet stream where we talk about what Hatchet very well may be, we actually talk about why Hatchet may not have demons, in the sense that you're dealing with someone entity that appears to be far more material than all of his compatriots. He seems to almost be present somewhere in the physical realm, which would mean that he is not in the ether to do a lot of those etheric shenanigans as easily. And B, that when you're dealing with a god of greed and tyranny, he's going to be far less inclined to do that, even if he could. But go watch our Hatchet stream. I'm 99% sure we actually tackled this exact subject as part of the stream.
Yeah, and broadly I agree. Go watch the Hatchet stream, because the Hatchet stream really does dive into that. That's actually the Zarnagrun stream.
Zarnagrun stream. Yeah.
So that's the Zarnagrun stream, where we take a good dive into the Chaos Dwarves, who they are, what they are, offer some pretty crazy theories for what Hashut could be, which I'm pretty sure Games Workshop probably wouldn't use, but I do think are probably better than what is potentially the alternative.
They'd be damn fools. Dino Man, thoughts on this name idea for a potential Verminlord associated with Clan Pestilence I had?
Nauseous.
Lord Nauseous. That would work very appropriately, yes.
Yeah, it would. Classic piece of Skaven naming nonsense.
Yeah, it's like... it's
Dino Man.
Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. That's better than some of the ones GW has come up with, to be frank. But that is how they tend to name their characters, very much so. I mean, just looking at some of the examples... Like the two really famous ones are Vermilanx and Scrollvex. So I think I actually like Nauseous a lot. Nauseous is a really good one. Hobnoblin. Besides obvious narrative questions, why do you think the Great Horned Rat never ascended Thanquol into a Verminlord? Given he is supposedly the Great Horned Rat's ideal form for escaping, you think he'd be a prime... Oh, I did?
Yeah, from the Singemeister.
That one's next. Yours is in a different order than mine.
Oh, mine's apparently a different order. That's crazy.
Yeah. Whatever, we'll get there. Given that he's the Great Horned Rat's ideal Skaven, you would think he'd be a prime target. So there's a couple ideas that you can run with there. A, that he might not necessarily be the ideal Skaven for Ascension, but he might be an ideal piece in some scheme that the Great Horned Rat foresees playing out, in which case he needs Thanquol as a mortal agent out doing things. There's also the idea that the lore kind of presents that I often am quite fond of, where the Great Horned Rat is not always fond of Thanquol. He has good moments and bad moments, where there are moments where Thanquol's favorability rises and falls, like many champions would, because there are times that Thanquol screws up and he gets punished, and there are times where he seems to do really well for himself. But Thanquol is kind of the living embodiment of falling into success or failing into success, which is something that I think the Great Horned Rat certainly respects. But as for why he wouldn't ascend him, I mean, I could give you the actual answer, which is that he's a popular character that sells and Games Workshop wants to keep him around. But if I'm giving an in-universe answer, probably the safest one to land on would be that there are things Thanquol can do as a mortal material being that he would not be able to do as an etheric being. So he needs to be kept around.
Yeah, that'd be one way of putting it. Or, the Horned Rat is a scheming, twisted, crazed, mental entity. A truly difficult, inscrutable creature to understand. And I think that just simply boiling it down to, well, he'd make a good one. Don't you like what he does? Completely misunderstands what the Horned Rat is. The Horned Rat is an extremely convoluted character. Further, just on the simple side, Thanquol makes great TV. And by that, I mean the Horned Rat sitting back gets to watch Thanquol and his crazy antics, which... Let's be honest, the Horned Rat is known for watching what his children does. He loves his children in a way that most other gods kind of don't, and often gets directly involved in a way that many other gods kind of don't, whether he's slapping them down in the most over-the-top ways, as we're going to discuss when we discuss one of the more famous Verminlords, right down to just helping them out when their plans go awry or they do really, really well. So, yeah, you can't be certain of what the Horned Rat will ever do. So I would generally say it's no surprise. This isn't a surprise. I'd say, if anything, this is the Horned Rat shtick. The more you think you're doing well before the Horned Rat, arguably the less likely he is to do what you expect next, because he is, by his nature, unpredictable.
Yeah, very much. Singemeister, there's actually 20 Great Horned Rats all stuck by their tails. Ah, yes, the Rat King.
Good old Rat King. Although I would probably change that to 13.
Yes. Sean Schultz, what do you call a Slaanesh rat? Any other under Empire, and what are they called? So, what would you call a Slaanesh, like Skaven? I don't know. There's not an easy terminology for it. I know of one in Age of Sigmar who is like an actual character that was used in a major narrative event, and I think he's still kicking around. But they're pretty rare, so they're not like Zongors, where there's like a whole bunch of them, therefore a categorical name. So I mean, you could just kind of come up with something, but they're pretty rare.
Yeah, broadly speaking, Chaos and the Skaven have held hands pretty much throughout the course of the lore in one fashion or another, right? At the very beginning, they effectively were just one of the many Chaos species. Then the Horned Rat became a thing, and then the idea that, you'd have Khorne Skaven or Slanesh Skaven or anything similar was very much pushed aside completely. The deeper background allowed it to be the case in that you could have arguably Skaven falling to Chaos, not the Horned Rat instead, but they were definitely not allies. The close connections between Nurgle, for example, and the Skaven were both sometimes reinforced and then pushed aside, and then reinforced, then pushed aside, according to the story and the edition. So this one here is an example of the outcome of that. It never gets categorized. It never gets pinned down. It's generally left for individual circumstances and perhaps one small novel over there, a short story over there, or alternatively a roleplay book reference in the far corner that no one's really paying attention about, where they go, you know what, this Skaven's fallen to Chaos, but that's about it. So it never gets a name. Having said that, though, it's definitely something that can happen, both in terms of the overall lore and how it suggests that Chaos works, and also the Skaven, who are always looking to get ahead. And sometimes that'll mean some of them will fall in one fashion or another to one of the Chaos Gods.
Yep. Weirda, who is the cutest, most edible Skaven? Thanks.
Wow.
That depends. I think that would be less of a who is the most petable and like who would be the most likely to cause you agonizing death by attempting to pet it. Just off the top of my head, I would.
I can't believe you're actually trying.
Yeah,
I love this.
I'm trying. Definitely, you can't do anything from Pestilence. Eshin would be not smart. Any of the Warlord clans would be not smart. Gracer would be a bad idea. So I would. You might be able to get away with Squeal Gnawtooth. Might, maybe. But probably. Yeah, it'd be a. Yeah, you're probably gonna lose your hand. You're probably gonna lose your hand at minimum.
Yeah, sure, that answer will do.
Yeah. Singemeister. So the Great Horned Rat is the god of ruin. The Dark King is the god of ruin from 40k. Dark King is the whole thing with the Emperor. Ergo, the Emperor is the Great Horned Rat. Oh, I am the Rat Emperor of Ratkind, the end of the death. Yes. I will say, 40k fans won't like me for this, considering that the Emperor and everything that humanity does in 40k is kind of that they sort of just hang out until the Eldar and all the other like bigger races kind of implode on themselves. And then humanity is basically just a tide of vermin that goes throughout the stars, inheriting everything. And then it all falls to ruination and decay and horribleness because of how inept the Empire or the Imperium is. Yeah, I could say, yeah, he probably is the Great Horned Rat. It wouldn't be that big of a stretch, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'll add a slightly different angle on this, and it's something that I always felt was a bit of a shame. The Skaven were truly one of the most unique creations for Warhammer, and it was always amusing to me that they never got ported over in some fashion, because we got our space dwarves, we got our space elves, we got our space orcs, we got our space ogres, we got our space halflings, we got our space beastmen, we got our space toads, we got our space frickin' everything, even space orangutans. Where the hell were my space Skaven? And the fact that they were never really done properly, although there were lots of potential hints of them, particularly if you look at some of the Black Library books and different attempts to try and suggest that, they're space Skaven, and often replacing them with a different name, and everyone going, wait a minute, is this what the Skaven are going to be in 40k? I always found it a bit odd, because they are one of the shining lights of Warhammer, because they are one of the most unique creations that they have for the setting, and it's actually not that much of a shame it didn't hit 40k, because it leaves Warhammer as something that's unique for its own.
Thank God 40k didn't ruin the Skaven.
It was a surprise.
They would have ruined it. It's fine. Yeah, it's better off they stayed out of it. That's how I feel about the Lizardmen in 40k too. Dynaman, how much did the various Skaven clans take things from each other and then further modify it? For example, Scryer took a mutated monster from Molder and shoving tech onto it, or would Molder take tech from Scryer and add it to monsters and stuff? Yes! Yeah, the Skaven are all about cannibalizing things, about taking things that other people have made and devolving it or repurposing it to themselves. That is the entirety of what the Skaven are. If you there's actually a really good quote from a character within the Creek Headtaker novels. This older Skaven character who he kind of laments that the Skaven in a way almost exist purely as parasites, in the sense that they are always taking something and then they're taking something that other people make and then they kind of mess around with it and in some ways make it better but also way worse. And they even do that to each other, where the clans are constantly stealing from one another, stealing ideas and fiddling with them and making them various ways. Or you have things like, if you read the Thangold novels, you'll see that Clan Eshin has taken rat ogres and they've modified them in their own way to make their own unique version of rat ogres. Clan Pestilence did a very similar thing. You have the idea, like all of the clans, while a lot of people will go, oh, Clan Molder is monsters, they only deal in monsters. No, they also specialize into crazy technology, growth vats, augmentations, things that you would think Scryer, but no, that's them. They deal with pathogens and things that change the body and mutate the body in extreme ways that you would think maybe leans more into pestilence. Like they interact with each other in really interesting ways and are constantly stealing from each other endlessly.
Yeah. Completely. And I think that you need to realize that not only are they stealing from each other, in many respects, Skaven are an ongoing evolution. And by that I mean, is that they often don't have a great plan for the crazy stuff that they make. They just build a thing until it goes wrong, and then they just keep using the last one that worked. And then someone else comes along and goes, well, wait, I could use that thing to go in this direction. Basically the concept of a mutation. And then suddenly it harks off in a different direction, and often using something that was never built to be used that way because they happen to have it to hand. Skaven are not necessarily very clever, although they are genius in their own way, in that if they built something from scratch, they would likely get better results, but they're not about that. They're about speed. They're about taking what they have, adding to it, making more, adding to it, making more, until it blows up. So the answer to your question is broadly, yes. But but also that is one of their biggest flaws, because everything explodes on them. Everything goes wrong. But sometimes they hit in this simple moment of genius where they create something that is so beyond anyone's expectations.
Yep. Roger, I just thought I'd pop in and say hi and stir the pot. Just how horny is the Horned Rat Adventure going to get in Lawhammer? Oh, that's what that actually means. Oh, I understand now.
The Horned Rat. Okay, I'll leave you to guess that one. And yes, some of our characters do enjoy the, nicer side of life. No, Ratlings in 40K are actually halflings. They're not Skaven. They have a misleading name. I remember when I first saw the term Ratlings being part of the Imperial Guard armies, and I was like, holy shit, we're going to get Skaven, because they already had that's when the Beastmen were added as well, and they were added as part of the Imperial Guard army. And I was like, holy shit, they're doing it. Nope, they weren't. It was just halflings.
Honestly, Skaven Imperial Guard would have made so much sense.
Yeah.
Random thought, given that kangaroo rats are a thing IRL, it would be amusing to have horrific mutated Skaven versions as a form of bouncy cavalry monsters. You could very easily make that and just be like, oh, people just haven't seen these often, but they're from this random clan way off to the side. And Definitely. I would go, yeah, that makes sense.
I wouldn't just say that makes sense. I'd say it's almost certainly the case somewhere, because the Skaven are constantly messing around with stuff. And indeed, if the Skaven had been, I'd say, maybe built by a slightly different team, that would have happened. I'm talking about your Squighorper teams at the studio, where they'd come along and said, here's a crazy idea. Why don't we add this? And it very likely could have happened.
There is.
So, yeah, defo.
There is an alternate reality where we had a team that instead of making wolf rats, made kangaroo rats. But we just don't live in that reality. Totally.
Yeah. Agreed.
Skaven Tech Bro, move fast and break things. Yeah, Skaven are very tech bro. Very much. All right, so swinging back around to Verminlords. So one of the things that Andy talked about a lot during his speech that is really interesting about the Verminlord in particular is that this is a entity that over Warhammer has evolved very steadily, with the minor time of 6th edition being that it just didn't show up. It still appeared in various reference books and stuff, but it was otherwise kind of left off to the side, which is, I suspect, probably why we actually didn't see them much in the Children of the Great Horned Rat book, because I believe that was around 6th edition.
It was.
So that's why they don't actually make much of an appearance in that book, which is interesting to think about in retrospect. But what I find very fun about them is that every time they do show up, it's one of those really great times where instead of just like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, Games Workshop took the idea and just evolved it a little bit more each time. Where if you look at the most modern Verminlord we have and take it back to the OG ones, you can actually see that really healthy evolution. If you go back to that old metal mini where he's got like the exposed bone head and the curly horns and the big old glaive, you look at the modern like Screech Vermicane, you're like, oh, okay, that's basically the same guy or the same mini, it's just gotten more elaborate. Which is a really, to me, that's a good sign of when you know Games Workshop hit on a good idea, is that they just mess with it a little bit, but keep the core philosophy really strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree that this is broadly how they've handled pretty much all of the Greater Demons as well, because the evolution of the Horned Rat's Greater Demon is pretty much matched by the evolution of the Greater Demons of all the Chaos Gods. In that they started off as one thing, they became a slightly different thing, and then they became something much bigger as we got exalted versions, and then we moved towards characters. And somewhat similarly, the Horned Rats version did the same. There was always characters. The very first iteration had a name. The very first example of it had a name. The old Realms of Chaos book said that every demon had a name, but obviously the army lists were dealing with generic, so you could make your own version. In the same way that they say the word general, I don't expect that the Skaven general is a general, or in Skaven's case, warlord. His name's not warlord. They all have names in the same way the Verminlord didn't. It wasn't until later, though, that they started examining the characters rather than just simply hinting that they existed. On the Verminlord in general as well, I remember when I first read about them. So we're now talking all the way back in the early 1990s. And the first description came out. And the model that we got in no way matched the description. So our very first description was an entity that was horrendous, with chunks of warpstone sticking out of it, flesh sloughing off of it, almost corpulent in terms of how it was. Its horns, immensely complicated, like a maze of horns rising up out of it, instead of what we got, which was a single set of horns and then a second set of slightly curled horns. An entity that was both agile and fast while simultaneously looking horrendous. What we got instead was something that was like a cross between a deer and a rat, which is interesting in terms of its overall physiology. A deer and a rat, with a big, extended, almost close to skull-edged Verminlordy face with the horns. It was a far simpler model than it was described in its original iteration. And interestingly, as we go through the different iterations later, it's not really until you hit the end times that they kind of go, yeah, this is what they look like, and they just stick with the model description. As you go along, you find that they're still described as manifestations of the Horned Rat with maze-like horns and totally over the top and crazy, often carrying enormous glaives for reasons that were never properly examined, but definitely were a thing. And that never really, I think, was landed with the miniature, but I love the miniature. So I was cool with that. 100% cool with that, because I remember when it came out, I was like, I'm painting one of these bad boys. And indeed I did. Good times with big red horns, my first one. It was good.
Yeah, and it's interesting how some of those elements from the model became so imperative, like Annie was saying, to the later lore of it, where like the simple glaive ends up becoming the Doom Glaive, which ends up being further expanded upon with every new appearance of the Skaven, where it goes from just being like, oh, he just has a big glaive, to like, oh, there are these eldritch big two-handed glaives that are all inscribed with these runes of ruination and pestilence, and get expanded upon, which is funny because when you look at the Horned Rat and the Skaven, like if someone's like, hey, what do you think would be like the most, like, it's like, oh, Khorne, the axe and the whip. Okay, yeah, those cool. Makes sense. Tzeentch, you got your staffs and stuff. Slesh, you got like claws and things that caress and tentacles and things, and Nurgle with his maces and things. And you look over the Skaven, it's like, what's the big ratty weapon? And someone went, a glaive, and they're like,
Yeah.
we're running with it.
Yeah, I believe that was Andy Chambers. And the Doomglaive, when it's very first described, as I recall, is heavy with death magic of all things. So as we progress through understanding what that means, effectively it's heavy with Shyish, which is, for me, kind of crazy in terms of its overall description. This changes in time as they effectively try to justify its weapon with its later iterations, and indeed for many of the Verminlords they just ditch it entirely and replace it with some truly badly named weapons, which to this day, whenever I read them in the end times, just make me go, that's the name you chose? Seriously? And yes it was.
Yeah. So as far as what do the Verminlords look like nowadays, and kind of working our way backwards, because that kind of is the situation that the end times put us in, is that they brought out the end times is really interesting for Thanquol in particular. The Verminlords are probably one of my favorite parts of the end times, because it's one of the only times where instead of just being like, hey, this thing happens, deal with it, let's move on, which they did with a lot of things, most notably like most of the corn stuff we got in book 5. I really hated how they implemented a lot of it, because they didn't explain it or look backwards. They just threw it in our face and were like, shut up, let's move. Whereas with the Verminlords, they actually took a big look backwards and were like, hey, you remember this thing that happened? Well, this is how these guys are involved. Hey, you remember how this thing happened? Well, that's still true, but here's how it was also these guys that were doing it. And it pulls up a lot of really fun references. So one of the but the big character that we should start with and kind of work our way backwards as then we can talk about all the generic ones is the special character.
Before we get there, though, we should probably just discuss what they're like. Just so we get the general generic character, just to make sure that we've got. So what are they like? We've already described this. What is an enormous entity? Generally, whenever they're pitched in the models, they're greater demon sized. Let's just say that, because we know that greater demon sized changes according to which version of the models you go with.
They're big boys.
They're big. Yeah, let's say that. They have great spiraling horns. They are symbols of decay in all of its manifestation. But these verminous lords are much more than that. The characters themselves are the ultimate expression of scheming, the ultimate expression of what it is to be a Skaven. They're extraordinarily intelligent, to the point that they're often in their descriptions marked as being much more intelligent than any living Skaven, much more so. And scheming with plots and twisting schemes that are so complicated and so maze-like that not only can no Skaven follow them, that arguably even Tzeentch would look on and go, seriously? That's how you're doing it? With Tzeentch, there's the great plan. It's fate itself, and fate is complicated. With the Verminlords, it's changeable. And it's constantly shifting as events shift, and they create new plans, new plots, new schemes, and do something completely different. Their passage as they move into the material realm from the realm of ruin brings ruination in and of itself. And they themselves have this aura of decay and also aura of deep intellect, and bluntly, Skaven not only fear them, but are, in many respects, they're absolute servants, in that many Verminlords can simply look at a Skaven and it just cows itself before them. And then that Verminlord may kill the Skaven, may not kill the Skaven, use the Skaven, do whatever they want with the Skaven.
One of the things they play around with in a lot of the end times lore that was really fun for the Verminlords is this suggestion that many of the Skaven believe that the Verminlords can read their minds. That they know everything they're thinking, they know all their plans and schemes and everything. And one of the things that's really fun is that the authors actually do a good job of leaving it deliberately vague about whether the Verminlords can actually read their minds or not. Where you get into this fun circumstance where in the Thanquol novel, unfortunately, Thanquol's not really the main character of the novel, which is a shame because the parts of it that he's in are really fun. That Thanquol is trying to play 4D chess against a particular Verminlord character, where Thanquol is trying to think certain things while also planning on the side to exalt himself and to betray the Verminlord because he's Thanquol. But he goes through these really elaborate mental gymnastics to try and do everything he's doing because he's scared that the Verminlord can literally read his mind. So he's trying to plot a scheme against someone that he thinks can read his mind. But the book hilariously, deliberately makes it vague of whether the Verminlord can even read minds or not, and it's just Thankful doing all this nonsense to himself. But one of the things with the Verminlords is that the end times, like Andy said, really reinforces the idea that they are demon princes, that they are mortal Skaven who were ascended into demonhood. And one of the things I really, really like about that is it really helps explain why the Verminlords give off very different vibes than other greater demons, where when they feel like they come into the material world, they have a very strong grasp on the material world. They have a really strong grasp on how it works, its machinations, how to get things done within it. They don't get... A lot of greater demons, in my opinion, especially when they're written well, can get kind of confused by the material world very easily, or there are a lot of things they don't necessarily understand about it, or they... one of the things that we've talked about in a prior stream when we were talking about like the concept of true names is the idea that a lot of demons feel very, not one-dimensional per se, but like they are a concept given form. There are very specific rules they follow. There are very specific ideas to their identities. Whereas the Verminlords, they are not that. They feel like full individuals. They have their own plans. They have their own schemes. They're trying to exalt themselves further, to make themselves grow in influence and power, which makes them really fun because you don't know what they're going to do.
As the core description, and again, we're moving to the end times when we use this, when the Verminlord first sets its foot into the material realm, the schemes begin. And I find that a very interesting way of describing it, because it does suggest that over in the realm of ruins, it's a very different process. But when they arrive, the material realm and all of its laws and all of its craziness settles in, and they are kind of at home. As is often the case, these Verminlords, being demons, can't last in the material realm for at all long. It takes a great event like the end times or one of the great storms of chaos for them to last in the material realm for any length of time. Typically, the Verminlords are always over in the realm of ruin. They only make their way over into the material realm for special events, effectively. And the keys that unlock the realm of ruin and allow these demons to enter are held by the Grey Seers, the priests, if you will, of the Horned Rat, who can then, through great ritual and almost certainly without desperately wanting to, summon 1/4. Trusting a Verminlord is a very bad idea. Making deals with a Verminlord is something that can be done, but will almost certainly end with not only your soul being lost, but everything else too. Verminlords are, much like the Skaven themselves, deeply untrustworthy, but they are characters, and that means that some of them are more trustworthy than others. Some of them are prone to fleeing. Some of them never face anyone down in hand-to-hand combat or any equivalent. They work from the shadows. They are prone to, and I know it sounds strange for an entity that is bluntly extraordinarily powerful, they are prone to running, fleeing. They are not like other greater demons who are almost manifestations of their god's will, slaying their way through giant Warhammer paths. These demons are as prone to running, fleeing, working from the shadows, allowing themselves to continue their schemes at a later date with almost mortal fear sitting at the back of their hearts. They're now, being Verminlords, effectively immortal, except, interestingly, there's more than one example of Verminlords dying and being replaced in the equivalent of the Council of 13 on the other side. So this is where they are different.
Yeah, so there is a really fun thing that's introduced in the end times, which, once again, we're going to talk a lot about the end times, but this is one thing that I actually really like about the end times. This is one of its better moments, is they introduce the Shadow Council of 13, but we're going to talk about a little bit more than them. So delving into the realm of ruin, there is a Shadow Council of 13 that mirrors the real Council of 13, where there are 12 Verminlords who are all sitting on this big council together, and many of them are patrons of various Skaven clans within the material world, and they are basically trying to manipulate or watching their clans and are trying to maneuver against one another in order to make their clan rise up, because when their clan rises up, they also rise up. And if their clan falls, they also fall, which introduces a really fascinating concept in the sense that, like in the real world, they could fall off the council entirely. And one of the things that we learn about the Realm of Ruin is that the Verminlords are not the only things in there. It's this great, desiccated, almost wasteland, a significant portion of it, of ruination and suffering, where things go and fall apart and collapse down into nothingness. And there's this very strong implication that if you are not exalted and favored with the Great Horned Rat, you fall off the council or you die in some horrible way and are defeated. This can literally result in the Great Horned Rat turning his attention to a Verminlord, and they fall out of favor. And they will either cease to exist or degenerate in some way out into the realm of ruin, where maybe they have an opportunity to come back and rise, but it is viewed with genuine terror by the Verminlords, which is a really unique concept.
Yeah, I'll also add that at least one Verminlord has literally ended, and I'm not saying died, because the concept of death with demons and demon princes doesn't really exist. They go away, they come back. The cat came back the rat came back the very next day. But there is examples of the horned rats, greatest entities, dying and being replaced on the council. Actually being replaced because they're dead. This is different. It also really, I think, lies at the heart of the corruption and the decay that sits with the horned rat itself. This is a place where no one is certain, not even the greatest minions of the horned rat, which is the Verminlords themselves. Not even they can be sure that they have the immortality that the other Chaos Gods have granted and given their ascended champions. You might fall out of favor, you might get yourself punished, but you are pretty much now eternal. Not the case with the Verminlords. And I think that really adds a freaking ton of character to both the god and the manifestations of the Verminlords and exactly what they are.
Yeah, because on one hand, it could really give the idea that the Great Horned Rat is, much like his children, a far more cautious, and you could say cowardly, but I would argue cautious entity, and that unlike the gods, he does not so freely hand out true immortality. He realizes that there is a inherent risk in that, a la Be'lakor type situation.
Be'lakor.
That, he keeps his guys on much tighter leashes, which is a really interesting concept, because if that's true, that explains a lot about the behavior of these Great Horn Verminlords, beyond just like, oh, they used to be mortal. But the idea that in some ways they still are would make them exceptionally unique, more than they already are as demons, in a really fun way. Because one of the things that's super interesting is that when you're dealing with demons, there's this place called the Forge of Souls, which is that when a demon is killed, they are usually banished to the Forge of Souls, and it takes them, and something happens there that essentially results in them being kind of put back together. And then once they've been put back together, then go out and go back and do things. But time winds shenanigans, so it's really messy about like how that correlates to the material world. But the Verminlords don't do that. They don't go to the Forge of Souls, which implies a really interesting, deep secret about their nature.
It's going to be different.
Yeah, they are demons, but what's interesting is that when they look, and this may explain why they almost come off more like material entities, is there's something about them that seems still very fundamentally material, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I kind of dig them. I will add, though, because the end times material is beautifully vague. It doesn't overwrite 6th edition. What it does is it evolves it, and it says there's a whole bunch of them that are this, but it doesn't say that there's no Verminlords that are nothing more than demons, that always were demons, greater demons. It definitely hints that might not be the case, but I think it's important to say it doesn't overwrite it, which I think is also super cool, because that means we potentially do have a mixture, a hierarchy almost amongst the Verminlords, where those who have been raised to demonhood are not necessarily as safe as those who always were part of what was the demon, the god, that is the horned rat, that are effectively immortal. But I reckon even they are not safe, because the horned rat itself is far too paranoid to grant anything immortality.
That was the word I was
looking for. It just is. And you might go, well, isn't that just it killing parts of itself? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. It's that part of the god sloughs free and dies because it's no longer useful. That particular scheme has come to an end. That horned rat manifestation comes to a halt. And I think that is super characteristic for the god as a whole, and really does ground the demons of the Skaven in a very different position to the demons of chaos in general.
Yeah, so I actually want to add a piece of AOS lore that I find supports this, and I really like. I haven't got the new 4th ed book, so I'm not sure how they've resolved this, because supposedly it's coming up to a resolution. But one of the things that happened in AOS that I really enjoyed in 1st edition is it talks about that when the Horned Rat got like a ton of power boosts from the end times. He played a really key role. He vastly increased in power. He participated heavily in destroying the world. He was on the winning team, so to speak. One of the things that happened that I loved is that they say what happens to him is that the Great Horned Rat, supporting this idea that there are pieces of him that are kind of arguing, that he ends up shattering into 13 godheads because of paranoia. He becomes so paranoid that there are different aspects of himself that might try and betray and devour the other aspects of himself, that he literally shatters into 13 godheads. And on 1st through 3rd edition, there's this scheming going on with the Skaven where each of these godheads is being supported by different groups of Verminlords who are trying to make that particular version of the Great Horned Rat rise up and devour the other 12 and become the new fully realized Great Horned Rat, which supposedly 4th edition resolves. But that really plays into that idea of you have this god that is so paranoid of what is essentially himself, like almost thinking of a Hydra where every head is thinking the other heads are going to try and devour him if he doesn't find a way to eat them first, which is a really fun idea for a god.
Yeah, I'll add one other core detail that is often forgotten about the Horned Rat demons, and that is they are all, to a man, kick-ass. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds obvious because they're greater demons, but think of all the other gods. They've got all manner of types of demons coming through. Not when the Skaven demons come through, they are kick-ass, and they are all top-tier magic users. And I mean top. There ain't anyone better in terms of how they express. The best Grey Seers are considered to be, at least lore-wise, significantly less capable than any of the Verminlords. The Verminlords are the peak of Skavendom. And that really does reinforce an exceedingly powerful set of entities. And as we will discuss, particularly when we move on to the end times versions of them, they manifest in many, many, many different ways. And all of those different ways have got deeply different characters. And as we said, they used a variety of basically splat sheets to say, oh, this is this one, this is this one, this is this one, with a lot of arguably extraneous text to try and support that. But that definitely reinforced just how different these characters are. And I think that in many respects shows the difference between them and, say, the greater demons of, say, Siege. Let's just take that. We get stats for a greater demon of Siege and an exalted of Siege, maybe a couple of characters, job done. Okay, we're here, we have stats for a whole slew of different versions of them, all of which have got their own character, again, showing just how much these Horned Rat demons are characters and individuals rather than necessarily how the other demons are presented, where they're far more conceptual in nature. For all, many of them clearly have what appears to be character.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting that is also fun is the book is also, I wouldn't even say vague, bluntly states that there are Verminlords that we don't get to see. Verminlords that don't feature, where they are unique, like they're just as unique as the Verminlords we're going to talk about are for one another, but because they're not necessarily relevant to the story that was happening in the end times, they kind of remain in the shadows, so we don't get models and designs for them. Like the Verminlord of Clan Molder is very mysterious and doesn't actually make an appearance. Whereas, and the same thing for the one that's, there is a Verminlord of Clan Scryer, but what's unique is that he's not very Scryery. And there are some pretty heavy rumors that I believe are correct, that supposedly we're going to be getting the big bad Clan Scryer thing Verminlord in the new edition of AOS. They're coming out with another Verminlord mini. But anyway, so as me and Andy talked about, the other fun thing about the Verminlords is that the ones that we see in the end times, which is not necessarily all of them, but the ones that we see in the end times are all revealed to have been mortals that ascended. So some of them are great assassins who accomplished like an absolutely amazing kill, killed something, or like they either wiped out a great number of opponents or killed an opponent so stealthily that no one noticed, despite them being in the most secluded of fortresses, or some great enemy, and some of them are corruptors, which are the pestilence things ones. But it doesn't reveal necessarily what a lot of them did, other than there's some great feat that they achieved that led to the Great Horned Rat deciding that he wanted them to rise up and join this Shadow Council, where they would go on to have their own duplicitous ideas and schemes and all these other things. And from that point, they essentially, the thing that makes me really laugh about the Shadow Council is the few scenes we get of them kind of almost seems like they're a group of assholes that are sitting around a table watching TV at the same time and angrily rooting for the people that they want to win, and then they're kind of like manipulating things as they can in their favor. But one of the scenes that made me really, really laugh in regards to the Verminlords, to kind of give them some character in a fun way, is there's a really iconic moment in Gracier Thanquil's life where he tries to summon a Verminlord, but he goofs it, though whether or not it was his fault or whether it was the relic someone else gave him's fault, he ends up summoning Scarbrand instead. He messes up and he summons Scarbrand the Exiled One, which is really funny and hilarious, which goes as well as you might expect. But in the end times, we actually get to see that scene again, but we see it from the Verminlord's perspective. And it's this hilarious scene of the Verminlords all cheering for Thanquil as he's unleashing this ritual. And one of them is getting ready to step through the portal, and then Thanquil botches it, and all of a sudden the portal shifts and Scarbrand pops out. And the Verminlords are just screaming and just upset, like the most upset, denied fury of like watching their favorite sports team lose, in the last 5 seconds of a match.
As I say, Thanquil, good TV.
Oh yeah, which just makes for a really fun scene of that. You have them kind of all hanging out together, constantly scheming with one another and just looking for those opportunities where they can throw themselves into the material world to really kick shit off. Because they are masters of kicking shit off. Like Andy said, the whole thing of that when they enter the realm, the schemes begin, where it really paints the idea that every time a Verminlord has stepped into material reality is a huge deal. Which is how, frankly, greater demons should be treated. Unfortunately, they don't get treated like that, but it's how they should be. Of that, the Verminlords, one of them stepping into reality is, okay, the future has now changed because one of these fuckers is here and they've got plans and they're going to make good use of their time. Really good use of their time.
Agreed. Right. Shall we turn into our super chats again?
Yes. Let's get caught up on that. And then we're going to start talking about some Screech Vermin King, I think.
I think that's definitely where we should go next.
Yeah. Here we go. Simon, there's actually a Lovecraftian god of ruin, bells, insanity, and rats, Nyarlathotep. If I remember well, Rats in the Walls is his main appearance.
So yeah, Nyarlathotep, I don't think really is any inspiration other than just gentle Cthulhu, strongly inspired many aspects of Warhammer in general. I don't think he's much of an influence at all. I've worked on Master Nyarlathotep, for example, for Call of Cthulhu on 7th edition, and know the entity, which would probably be better very, very well indeed. But I would broadly suggest that nothing more than an edge influence at most. But yeah, good to catch, definitely.
That's funny that he's a god of rats, because there's a very
not
funny.
Really.
Oh really? Oh well.
Yeah, not really. Not really.
I've seen a lot of people making into a cat god because he has nya in the first part. So a lot of cultural things these days turn into a cat god. Phil, okay, I'll bite. What makes the Skaven so unique? It's not like backstabbing rats plotting to take over the world like Saturday morning cartoon villains wasn't already done before. Check out Fritz Lieber's Grey Mouser novels. Bring Warhammer's only true unique faction back into AOS. All hail the Gorefather. Okay, I know with Gorefather, you are not talking about Beastmen being a true unique faction after talking about Skaven, but I don't know if Andy wants to tackle that.
Right, so broadly, rather than specifically here, all of Warhammer's factions are copy-pasted. Chaos comes from Michael Moorcock. The Empire is just the Holy Roman Empire. Britannia originally was pre-revolutionary France, but later on became Arthurian England mixed with Arthurian France. Although that's an interesting way of pitching it. If we go around the various places in the Warhammer world, they were all originally copy-paste. The Skaven absolutely were not. Even the Orcs were. Now, in time, all of these factions would become unique in their own way as each iteration of writers came on board and went, that thing that came before, I'll dial it up to 9, 10, 11. And it started becoming its own thing. But the Skaven took something that didn't really exist anywhere else and made it its own thing. They created their own version of, often, and many people miss this, Roman-influenced Ratmen. A lot of the Storm Vermin have got the crests because they come from Tilia. So they got influenced in a variety of ways that you might not necessarily know from many of the models. That's where all the crests on many of the Skaven originally came from. They're the crests of Rome. And rather than copy-pasting, they just took lots of ideas and created something new from the outset with their new Ratmen. And the concepts put together by Jez Goodwin were just freaking amazing and awesome and broadly new. And that is, I think, one of the rare examples in Warhammer where we have something that's not entirely unique. You're right, it's drawing influences from everywhere. And for all many people thought it might have been directly influenced by, for example, Roland Rat, which was an 80s TV kids show in the UK. And whenever he had a sidekick called Kevin, and whenever Kevin came on, he'd go, "Here's Kevin!" And everyone thought that that's where Skevin came from. It isn't. It's just from Scavenger, obviously. I mean, seriously. It's obviously from Scavenger. But that doesn't matter.
I kind of wish that was where it actually came from.
I wish it was true as well, because that would be awesome. But they are pretty unique. They're not taking something from Tolkien, say orcs, and going, here's our orcs. Oh, we need to change them slightly. Oh, we'll add a detail, as they slowly became a more British version of orcs over time, and they moved from being grey to being green, or they moved from being yellow to being green, and then they became football hooligans, and then they became channeling weirdos, and all sorts of crazy stuff were added on time as they iteratively developed. Right from the outset, the Skaven were something that were pretty much not seen anywhere else, which is why I to this day attest that they're one of the few shining lights of Warhammer that were truly original.
Yep, could not agree more. Wait. Oh, no.
I think you've skipped a bunch there.
Yeah, there we go. Scoring the musk of excitement for these in Warhammer 3. Yeah, a lot of people are very excited for what they're going to do with the Verminlords in Warhammer 3. It's going to be interesting, especially because there's so many types. Because knowing Creative Assembly, they're probably going to do what they did with the other chaos factions, where they're going to look and they're going, okay, we're going to boil it down to two, where you're going to have a Verminlord and an Exalted Verminlord. We're going to leave it at that. So it's going to be interesting to see which variants make the cut for those two versions. Because I don't think they're going to do 4 versions. Because that's a lot for a single entity. Commander Bone, hi, after a long time. Shame Scryer and Molder don't have their own Verminlords. Cyber Demon, Rat, and Patchwork, the thing, Rat Demon would be sweet for them. I mean, on one hand, I do like when there's spaces that are kind of left open so that people can kind of make their own things. Because, like you said, I don't think it's hard for anyone sitting in this room to imagine what could be for a Scryer Verminlord and a Molder Verminlord. But also, like, with how popular the Skaven are, I would not be surprised at all if that's something Games Workshop is planning on rolling out in the future. Because never say never with them. But, yeah. That's all I have to say to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Broadly. But yeah, agreed.
Verminlords are the pinnacle of the Skaven path to glory. Yes, yes. Yes, the good old Skaven path to glory. Phil, again, can we look at the Great Horned Rat as some sort of spiritual successor to Malal, a personification of the inherent infighting of chaos among others like Archaon or Be'lakor? And yes, the Skaven are, if not worshippers of chaos, an offshoot of chaos in my book. Sorry, Andy, but it just makes too much sense.
So, not really, no. I mean, the Horned Rat has been there from the beginning, at the same time that Malal was there too, and as an entity was long there too. As chaos creatures, in the Warhammer world, I think they are much less suitable for being chaos in that they don't have the same goal as chaos as a whole. Where when we move to Age of Sigmar, it makes much, much more sense because the Horned Rat shifts allegiance from being the Horned Rat to being the Horned Rat who's working along with others in a variety of ways towards similar ends. And those ends have changed because the Warhammer world is no longer there. So the goal of the Horned Rat is so vastly different to what the goal of the Chaos Gods is that you often find them not just coming into conflict, they are frequently in conflict, and frequently deeply in conflict, where the Skaven themselves are scheming and counter-scheming and scheming and counter-scheming, and making allies in places you wouldn't expect in a way that the Chaos Gods just don't. And they're not part of that whole pantheon at all. So I've always found it a weak self-justification as they attempt to try and make sense of the Skaven. And whilst the End Times definitely dials hard on the Skaven being chaos, dials on it pretty hard. It's a chaos god. He's this, that, and the other. As we go back into some of the previous iterations...
I actually want to counter-argue against that.
Well, I say die hard because it's literally described as chaos god, minor chaos god, chaos god, where they had dialed away from those descriptions.
Yeah,
some of the other expansions.
Say, though, I think the End Times did a good job of kind of supporting the idea that Skaven are not part of the Big C team, really, because they had to be deliberately invited and like form a pact in Book 4. Because in Book 2, you get big chaos, which is all the beastmen, all the various mono god stuff, all the demons, Archaon, all the warriors together, and you're like, look, there's big chaos. That's big chaos. Mm-hmm. And then Book 4's big revelation is the Skaven have finally picked a side, which I think is interesting that they had to pick a side. They weren't just automatically on Team Chaos. Pretty
much agreed entirely. Yeah, 100%. And that's exactly how I see it, which is why pitching it purely as a chaos god, I think, is incorrect in terms of factioning gods, if you will. The Horned Rat comes long after the Cataclysm. The Horned Rat forms long after the Cataclysm. The Skaven form after the Cataclysm. All of the various great entities, the Verminlords, form after, either the ones that are part of the god or alternatively are raised up to and ascend into positions of power in the realm of ruin. And they have always been pretty much from that point onwards skirting with, allying with, but not necessarily being a part of chaos, which is why I generally suggest that they make a poor bedfellow with chaos in general. But that doesn't mean that Games Workshop agrees. In many places, they quite clearly state Skaven, chaos, chaos, Skaven, and then often have whatever the Skaven do completely contradict that all the way through.
Yeah, I personally, I have mixed feelings in that I think Skaven in my opinion, are really good. How do I say this? If you're dividing the world into chaos versus everybody not chaos, then I think the Skaven work really good as a neutral faction. I kind of put them in the same ballpark as like the ogres, where like they can join either team, but they're kind of in it for their own things instead of just saying, oh, well, they're team chaos. Now, I think if you're dividing the world into like forces of flat out fucking evil versus forces of not really that evil, but like they're trying to do the right thing, that, oh yeah, Skaven are way over there on that team.
Agreed.
But because that's the thing is Games Workshop themselves have been pretty like muddy about how they try and divide up the world, because to be frank, they don't really care that much. And because it's so messy, it can be really misleading. Is the best way I can think to put it.
Yeah, and Games Workshop themselves have changed that position on more than one occasion, sometimes live in the run-up towards the old world.
Yeah, because like a good example would be like, if you look at the Storm of Chaos, a lot of people go, oh, well, okay, surely the Skaven were on Team Archaon, because like there's a whole thing about how like Archaon like wasn't given Gorich, and he like turns Gorich into this magical creation stuff. But when you actually go and like read the story, it's the idea that Archaon deliberately avoids Hell Pit, and he works on making a pact with them and like having various trade with them so that they don't attack him, so that they don't attack his flank and slow down his evasion. Because Archaon realizes that if he has to go through Hell Pit, it's going to vastly deplete his resources and slow him down, and that's not what he's here to do. So they're a neutral faction. They're on nobody's side but their own, which makes them
and because
better.
they're on their own, if you happen to be a bad guy, chaos guy, they can be easily bribed or easily coerced because they're all about furthering their own individual positions, and that own individual position may involve them making a deal with chaos directly to get stuff.
Yep. Biofoot. For a truly Lovecraftian faction, we at least have some of HP's beliefs in the past. Maybe we can have some gills. I don't know. Biofoot always here peddling his fishmen. Sean Schultz, who's your favorite Verminlord and what is your famous Verminlord? Okay, so I'm going to assume, because you said what, that you're talking about type, but I'll go ahead and answer both versions just to be safe. My personal favorite type is the Verminlord Corruptor, which is the Clan Pestilence one, because I really like the exposed skull theming. It makes them look extra nightmarish, in my opinion. And also, I just really like their design. I'm a Clan Pestilence fanboy. And as far as my favorite individual Verminlord, for me, it's Vermilanx, who is the big bad of the Verminlord Corruptors. I very much like his character. He gets to do some really cool shit in Age of Sigmar and in Fantasy. I just like him. I can't really tell you why, I just do.
Yeah, I find this one a bit of a toughie. I didn't really enjoy the different types of Verminlords all that much, largely because they were given stats that were nigh on identical. They barely had any character differences between them beyond what they said. Aha, this is our sneaky, stabby one. Look at him come forward with his warp stiletto. Seriously, a warp stiletto. As he creeps out, oh, here's our plague. Here's our warlord clan example. Oh, these are the most common. They like to fight and stuff. Lots of them fighting and stuff. Oh, but they also run away and stuff. It all just felt a little bit. Yeah, this is nice, but why aren't they massively different in their stats? And I do mean massively. Why don't we have reinforcement of character here? And they kind of didn't. So I don't really have a favorite one. I just like the Verminlords as an overall concept and the idea that they do express very differently, whilst not really liking how they attempted to manifest that differently. As for individuals, none of them really got given enough character, really, from my perspective, to absolutely love one over any other. Whenever they were given the extra character, you're like, yeah, that's kind of cool. We've got some bits, but they were all much of a muchness. Crazy over-the-top Skaven entities. I do quite like the one that they added with the End Times, good old Screech. We're about to move on to him. He's yes. Proper mental. He's proper crazy. And I quite like the idea and the concept behind him and where he came from, while simultaneously thinking it's a bit daft. So I don't really have a favourite. A bit daft. I mean, the Skaven tend to be a bit goofballish in general, but this is a... we'll get onto that story in a moment.
That's kind of that thing of like, if it's not at least a little daft, are you doing it right?
Yeah, quite.
It has to be a little stupid. So, let's talk about Screech Vermin King.
We've still got some more bits to go if you want to finish off the things. Yeah, we do, I think. Oh, maybe we don't. Did I miss them?
There's only one more. Skaven are technically like Beastmen. There is too many differences between the two, however. Being created by Skavor and having tech is one of many. I mean, I would argue the Skaven were not created by Skavor. I think that's a crackpot theory some dwarf came up with in a tavern somewhere.
Yeah, totally.
If you go watch our Zarnagron stream, me and Andy have our own opinions on what Skavor should be up to and who he might be. But because that's purely an idea introduced from a dwarf perspective, is that, oh, clearly the Skaven were made by Skavor the Maimed, because that's the only place they could have possibly come from. Whereas everything from the Skaven perspective is like, no, that's fucking ridiculous.
Yeah, pretty much.
But that being said, like saying Skaven are technically like Beastmen, to me, that's like saying, well, Lizardmen are technically like Beastmen. Or humans are technically like Beastmen. Elves are technically like Beastmen. Like, it's because they are animal-like, and they're humanoid, animals. They're, anthropomorphized critters. Does not make them like Beastmen. The Beastmen and the Skaven are grossly far apart. The only thing I would actually say that really jumps out at me is that they have similarities, is their deep respect and cultural development around horns. But other than that, in my opinion, they're very distant. Very, very distant.
So I'm going to massively agree with that while simultaneously muddying the waters. The Skaven are not Beastmen. The problem with Beastmen is that Beastmen is a catch-all term for anyone that's kind of mutated by chaos to look like an animal, because it's kind of still used for that. Plus, the very clear, discrete species, the gores, the bestigores, all of the gores. Let's call them gores. And gores are absolutely not Skaven. Now, if you want to go down the angle of, well, are beastmen just people that look like beasts? Then yeah, there's freaking tons of those all over the Warhammer world under a variety of different terms, and that's one of the great benefits for the Skaven, because they can hide behind that. The beastmen are a known quantity in the forests. They patrol, they move around in herds, sometimes pure war herds of evil, and they are a known danger, which means the Skaven, whenever they get encountered, can be mistaken for beastmen, which means that they can continue to not be that known quantity that's living and gnawing at the roots of society underneath. They just get mistaken for being something else. But I could not agree more. Skavens are so far removed from beastmen to almost be clearly a discrete species that are so massively unlike beastmen that it's barely even worth comparing them. For all in-game world, they would often be mixed up. And yeah, they're just another anthropomorphized species, of which I'm sure we'll probably get another one at some point when Warhammer becomes more elderly and moves in a different direction, because there's lots of examples of them that have not been truly explored yet by Warhammer.
Yeah. So with all that out of the way, oh, you know what? One last one snuck in. Last one, and then I'm talking about Screech. How could the Great Horned Rat be a minor god? He's over 30 years old. Ha 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 ha.
And surely if he's a minor god, he'd be down the mines. Ha 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 ha. Oh dear. Oh, proof that he was made by dwarves.
He's
a minor god.
Oh my god, heard it. Someone's writing it down. So, Screech Vermin King. For those unaware, as the name Vermin King might imply, in the end times, he is revealed to be the big bad of the Verminlords. He holds the second council seat, the first belonging to the Great Horned Rat himself. So he sits beside the Great Horned Rat, who, of course, the Great Horned Rat is not actively on the council. Hilariously, the Great Horned Rat has the same relationship with the Shadow Council that he does with the Council, where he's not actually there. He's off doing god things. But Screech speaks with the most authority and is considered the most favored of the Great Horned Rat, and has held that position for thousands of years at this point. Though whether, time and how it works, yada yada, ethereal, yada asterisk. But in any event, Screech is a really unique character. There are a number of things about his design that jump out very quickly. The first being that, of course, his set of horns is very elaborate compared to any of the other minis, where he's got nice. A good 10 or 12 different horns. The other thing that jumps out a lot of people for his design is that half of his face is missing. Where half of his face has flesh and the other half is just skull, which implies something that we'll talk about in a little bit. And the thing that's revealed about him that's very, very fascinating, beyond the fact that he's incredibly powerful, he's the only Verminlord that gets away with wielding a Doomglaive and I forget what his other weapon is.
Plague Reaper, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. He has a Plague Reaper and a Doomglaive, which none of the other Verminlords are allowed to have that combo. It's a really nasty combo because it gives him some gross abilities for his attacks. And he is a stupidly powerful wizard, to put it bluntly. His magical capabilities are insane. He is the strongest wizard the Skaven have, period. He's gnarly. But one of the things that's revealed about him, so talking about kind of more of his origin, and then kind of working our way forward with him, is that, and something this opens up a whole can of worms we'll talk about in a second, is that he is not one Skaven who ascended, he is 12. And that a long time ago, during the Rise of Nagash, go back and watch our Nagash stream. Nagash nearly destroyed the world, or took over the world, to put it more accurately. He almost conquered the world for himself. And a lot of different factions freaked out, but the Skaven were ultimately the ones that stopped him and saved the day. And the reason the Skaven were able to functionally stop him is because the Council of 13 of that time managed to, for the first time in the Skaven's history, make a unanimous decision. They made a vote about whether or not they should stop Nagash, and they came to a unanimous conclusion. And they pulled off what, when you really look at it from an in-universe perspective, felt impossible. Like, they really pulled out all the steps and achieved something that even like the Chaos Gods were not able to have pulled off at that time, because the Skaven are pretty fucking terrifying when they unify behind a single idea. And once Nagash was destroyed, which was one of the greatest feats the Skaven as a species would ever go on to achieve, which is a hell of a feat, because they didn't, it wasn't like, oh, they caught Nagash. Like, this was Nagash at his zenith, and they managed to take him down. And the Great Horned Rat swooped down and grabbed all 12 of the Council of 13 and sucked them into the Realm of Ruin, where he melded them into a singular entity so that they would be unified as a being, just like they were unified in their decision. Because he realized in that moment, he basically wanted to capture almost the essence of that epoch-making decision and immortalize it as an actual entity. And he did, which is really interesting. Also, I will say it is really hilarious to imagine how the Skaven dealt with the Council of 13 just vanishing. Just being gone.
Yeah,
probably...
I think you're simplifying it a touch there, because as I recall, Nagash pretty much screws the Council of 13, and they get they basically die, and they are punished by the Horned Rat and thrown down into a deep oubliette in the middle of the Realm of Ruin. And they're punished because he is so disappointed with the fact that it all went a little bit wrong while simultaneously went right. Or something like that. I read it a while ago, so...
never been that way, but I'll double check.
Because I remember, because the part I remember is him then pulling them out, expecting them to be pretty much still 12 individuals, and they merged in the oubliette. Yeah, they merged when they were down in this oubliette of hell after an unknown amount of time, and he went, you know what? I kind of like this crazy thing that's come out, and that is where he created good old Screech from, as he pulls them all together.
Yeah, man, I totally forgot that part. You're right. Oh,
yeah.
Right, because so what happened is interesting. So the big thing that happens here is that oh man. So yeah, so man, it's been a hot minute since I've reread this. So
yeah, me too.
Two of the Lords of Decay die because of Nagash.
That's it. Yeah.
And then the other 10 of them, after Nagash dies, immediately fall into infighting and basically throw away all of the momentum that they had going. And the Horned Rat was like, all right, and just grabbed all 10 of them. And he grabs
them and pulls them away. That's it. Thanks. I knew it was something like that.
So that means there's so Screech is not made of 12 rats, he's made of 10 rats.
10. So thanks for confirming that as well, Servant of the Great Horned Rat. As far as I recall, the Gash killed 2. Yes, killed 2. My memory's a bit faulty in this one. It's been a long time since I read it, because between you and me, I don't like reading the End Time books that much. For all this is one of the better parts of them.
Oh wow, that's hilarious. He left them in there for years, and it fed them the scraps of failed plots. That's such a fascinating concept.
Yeah, I love that.
But interesting. Yeah, so when he emerges, when he pulls them out of that pit, instead of it says there were 12 Lords of Decay in the pit, which is interesting because it implies the 2 that died were also in there.
Well, I mean, that's possible because their souls are claimed. Although you'd think Nagash would be pulling that soul out, don't you? Definitely something there that's of interest.
Yeah, so the thing worth noting about this that's interesting is that what he pulls out is not Screech as we know him, but like a horrifying amalgamate.
Was their tails locked? He was a Rat King.
Yeah, a big Rat King horrible thing, and the Great Horned Rat goes, I'll dig this, and then he zaps them with a big bolt of magic that remakes them into an image more pleasing to him, which is where we get Screech.
Yep. Totally.
But the thing that's really fascinating about Screech is that while he is one entity, he appears to have those different individuals in his mind, because one of the things you learn about Screech whenever you're dealing with him in the canon is that he always speaks in plural when he refers to himself. He never refers to himself as an individual because he seems to be a collection of individuals. But Screech, in that sense, kind of represents the best and brightest of the Skaven, being like this whole one of the best, arguably, Councils of 13 melded into a singular entity. And from that point forward, he very I actually love that way more than I remembered. Loving that because I had totally forgotten about the punishment part. Because man, he exemplifies the Skaven even better than I remembered him doing.
Yeah.
And that he's literally a redemptive thing made from the Great Horn Wrath displeasure, and he knows the Great Horn Wrath displeasure better than anyone. Of having that hovering over his head. And Screech Vermin King has gone on to lead the council, the Shadow Council of 13, and to try and keep the Skaven organized and moving on a path, not to fuck up what he did, to build up that momentum to get the Skaven moving in one unified direction, which, to be fair, is literally the most difficult thing in the Warhammer universe. Yeah. I think, honestly, getting the Skaven unified is even more difficult than getting the Dark Brothers or the Chaos Gods unified. You know, they've done it arguably 13 times because Archaon's the 13th ever chosen. The Great Horned Rats managed to get his children to do it like twice.
Yeah, I think one of the fun things about the Vermin King is obviously it's just a rat king with its tails wrapped together, pulled out. Then they merged that into our multifaceted Screech. But one of the great fun things of Screech is that he is the only representation underneath all of the Horned Rat's minions of all of the clans. So he's got all of the stealth of Clan Eshin, he's got all the plague knowledge of Clan Pestilence, he's got all of the tech nonsense from Clan Scryer sitting off on the edge as well. He is an amalgam of the lot, which makes him in many respects a representation of Skavendom as a whole. He is a pretty damn awesome character, with including all the magic of the Grey Seers too, which is why I remember keenly going, oh cool, look at his stats, then turning the pages and finding every Verminlord had the same freaking stats. Thanks for that.
Yeah, their profiles,
game balance.
Their profiles are really silly.
Yeah, their profiles are very silly. Nevertheless, the profile is pretty damn awesome. What I will say, though, that in the End Times book, the art that's dropped for Screech is that it's pretty goddamn freaking cool. Yeah, pretty freaking cool.
A lot of the End Times art, which is a shame because a lot of people never got to see it because the books are so expensive and limited. Really beautiful artwork for a lot of them. So the thing that I love about Screech is that opens a really fascinating can of worms for literally all of the other Verminlords. The idea that they are not necessarily individuals. And I would argue it's probably, if anything, more likely they are not individuals, which once again makes the Great Horned Rat have a fascinating difference from every other god we know of. Every other god that I'm aware of, their demon princes are a single individual that ascends to demon princedom. I don't know of any others that is a conglomerate of individuals.
I mean, you've got. I mean, Kairos is a bit two-headed. But
he's one guy that split his head into two.
Yeah, I agree. And broadly, I think I agree. The idea that we've got ourselves effectively colony entities here. Now, Screech may be unique in that regard, and I think that's cool if he is, but equally, it does speak to the Horned Rat as a whole, and also what the Horned Rat becomes as a multi-headed entity at a far later date when we move into Age of Sigmar. It's definitely a different direction, and that I think is a strength, because if you're just retelling the same stories again and again, it makes those stories less interesting. So at least adding a slightly different dimension and a different angle is a good thing, even if they don't necessarily make great use of that.
Yeah, because I also think it could really lead into a really fun idea. This isn't said by any means in the lore, but I'm just throwing, as we like to do on Lorebeards, some crackpot ideas at the wall of the idea that the Horned Rat, as a paranoid entity, doesn't even raise up individuals, but instead forces there to be multiple consciousnesses or entities stuffed into a ideal form to not only bring out the best of each of those individual components, but so they also keep each other in check, in a sense, because they're literally these paranoid things that have these other voices that are constantly trying to drive into a singular direction, which can make for a really fun concept of how the Horned Rat decides who and how to ascend people. That it can't just, and that might also explain like the Thankel situation, that it might not be that they're these amazing individuals that just get plucked and raised, but instead a group of individuals that may not even necessarily be working together, because think about how Scrooge Vermin King was actually working against one another when they got sucked up and thrown into the pit. of the idea that he is taking groups of individuals that impress him in some specific way and gathering them up to remake. I also like that there's a very heavily implied aspect of torture as part of his ascension, instead of it being this exalted, glorious ascension like what we tend to see with regular demon princes. The idea that the Great Horned Rat actively almost kind of melts people down before remaking them into his own image is also a really fascinating idea that I love a lot, because it just shows how unique he is as a deity compared to everyone else that we see kicking around.
Yeah, I think that to reinforce the concept of all these different paranoid aspects of the Horned Rat, there's probably as many ways to ascend as there are paranoid plans of the Horned Rat itself, as many coils in its twisted horns as there are different types of Verminlords that have been created in different ways. And the good old Vermin King is just one example of the many different examples that lie out there. But I think to reinforce the point being made there, is this a unique situation? I think the very nature of it suggests it's probably not, given that it was also a relatively old one, and one that in the time scale would certainly have potentially been attempted to be replicated. There's no reason why it wouldn't have been. So yeah, I'm pretty cool with that. I think that there are likely those that are individuals, those that are perhaps colony, those that are perhaps of one mind but not necessarily of one start. The Skaven have always been a colony species in general, so that replicating that with the manifestations of them in the aether makes a great deal of sense. It's almost like you've got Under Altdorf being represented, not just individual clans. And the clans are represented by the Verminlords, that we know, but there's absolutely no reason why entire colonies of the Skaven wouldn't also be, to a degree, represented by the Verminlords that are, in many respects, a reflection of all the great schemes of the greatest colonies. Skavenblight itself probably has the effective equivalent of a patron deity, which is the equivalent of the representative of what Skavenblight schemes are, with the possibly the Grey Seer, the core Grey Seer in the Council of 13 being the only one who can pull upon that individual one. Now, is that going a little bit out of the, let's say, the fiction a little, in that we're looking at it and saying, what could it be? Absolutely.
No, yeah.
That's not what the book says. The book says basically there's a whole screed of them, loads of them everywhere. Yeah, they all have the same stats. Don't think about that. They're all very different, completely different. Each of the clans are represented differently. Some of them are faster than others, even though they all have initiative 10. They are all reflected in different ways.
If you're fast, you can always strike first. Otherwise, you're just initiative 10. Oh, okay.
Yeah, totally. Some of them are schemers. Some of them are absolutely obsessed with their plot. Some are obsessed with disease. Some are obsessed with technology. Some are obsessed with a variety of different things. So we know there's lots of them, and I think that there's no reason why a lot of them couldn't also be represented in many different ways by how they ascended, or in some cases. I think, just to put one other one, particularly we're separating them from the Forge of Souls, I see no reason why, for example, that the greater demons of the Skaven wouldn't become... So we have a greater demon of the Horned Rat, which is almost like a small aspect of the Horned Rat, one of its many faces that it represents. And when someone ascends, they move into that slot. So it's almost like the other greater demon slots are filled, and then if that one fails, it dies, but the greater demon continues until someone else ascends into the slot. There's lots of different ways you could use it if you want to try and build your own way of building a Horned Rat version that is uniquely different, and I think it'd be something that would be worth doing in a lovely book.
Yeah, so something I thought about that I also really... So if you want to have like something really terrifying to consider, if you're exploring like, well, what could be going on in the Realm of Ruin to make it interesting beyond just the Verminlords and like the carpets of rats that are implied to be demons, but they're just like little rats that come out whenever the Horned Rat, like, you know, punches through the realms or whatever. The idea that if he created Screech Vermin King, you know, makes this horrible thing by throwing it down to a pit, and he pulls it out and it's this like terrible amalgamate Rat King thing, and then he zaps it to make it into a better, more efficient form. What if there are things in the realm where he doesn't do the zap? You know, where he pulls out this horrible amalgamated thing and goes, nope, and just lets it roam the Realm of Ruin. that there are these rat demons that are like a horrifying amalgam chaos spawn type creatures. That could be really fun and disgusting as a unique concept for a creature that roams as almost the equivalent of a beast demon, or a lesser demon.
Yeah, I think that there is currently a gap in the Skaven lore, and that gap is what lies within the Realm of Ruin. And we have a pretty good idea of different versions of the Realm of Chaos and all the different demonic entities that live there that call it home, you know, where they all gather around a fire and have a lovely time torturing souls. What exactly is in the Realm of Ruin? What other type of demons do we have? Now, obviously, if you open up a portal into the Realm of Ruin, rats are going to come screaming out. They're not real rats. So we already have our least demons, our equivalent of nurglings, and they're just rats. But they're magical rats. They're demonic rats. They're carrying demonic plagues and other horrible things.
You
And many of them
eat through solid steel, but just
anything, quite. Quite. And if the magic becomes weaker, they will just fritter into nothingness. But we do know that they, at the very least, exist. And the idea that there's much, much more beyond that is, I think, obvious. There clearly is. The Verminlords are at the top, the rat demons are at the bottom, and there's going to be a whole, not necessarily a hierarchy, although it being the horned rat, it's all about those twisting, turning schemes and everyone knowing what their place is, the various cogs. There is going to be probably, to a degree, a hierarchy. They have a council at the top running it all, after all.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So there's definitely going to be something there, and I think that's a big open hole that could be fun to explore in a variety of ways if you've got your own games or if you want to try and do something for yourself.
Yeah, and within this, there's also with everything me and Eddie talk about, you can see how easily even a lot of the old Verminlords can fit into the system quite easily, where you have Prasnagar, the Prince of Agony, being like a Verminlord that used to be on this council but fell from the council for whatever reason. If you want to run with the original story that he gets in a fight with Solkon and gets trapped and dies somewhere, and then eventually gets full on killed, like you can run with that 100%. Or Queethel, same thing with Queethel, of that Queethel was once on this council but fell for some reason and has maybe survived hiding out somewhere else in the universe.
Burrowed deep down and is sitting close to the Realm of Chaos somewhere, gnawing away over there in his own throne. That's brilliant.
Trying to avoid Big Daddy. Some of the other ones, just to introduce y'all to a couple of the other ones as we kind of, so we have, as far as the types of Verminlord, so Screech is unique.
Before we dive into them, should we finish off because I think we've got a few extras, get our super chats out of the way, and then go into the different types of Verminlord, because that's also well worth doing, I think.
I agree very much. Is the Shaper from the Dune of Kasvar an old one? Could be.
So this is a common theory.
Not, could be.
This is not just a common theory. This is a very common theory. It popped up. I remember when the story was first, the Doom of Kasvar, and its lovely little poem and all the rest of it pops up. And people immediately started suggesting that. And that was back in the era when the old ones were not necessarily quite as mysterious and mental as they are today. And as it progressed through, the hints were dropped that it very possibly could do. And behind the scenes, I know one writer intended it to be. So I know one intended it, but that's not in any way, shape, or form what happened, because that did not actually occur in the book, and I don't think it would have probably passed licensing even if they had attempted to make it the case. But they were definitely aiming for that to be the case behind the scenes. So is it an old one? Sure, in your world it could be, but if you look at the nature of the old ones and everything else, I would say instead that it's part of the old one's schemes. So perhaps let's call it old one -1. Because the Skaven clearly are part of the plan.
So it'd just be old?
Yeah. Or one. It's just one.
Just one.
No, -1. No, you're right. It's just old.
Yes, it's old.
I see what you're saying.
I'm very clever.
It's an old.
So an interesting thing with that is one of the things when it comes to the old ones is we'll do a stream Lorebeards on them at some point, because there's actually been some really interesting newer stuff coming out about them, like just between the old world and Cubicle 7 as well, where the Cubicle 7 book, I want to say it was Up in Arms, has been leaning quite heavily into the idea that Solcon, or Sol, or however, may also be an old one, which is an interesting.
That's definitely a take.
Way to take it. There's stuff happening with like, oh, could the old one still be around type concepts. But Charles, is it only the Empire who denies / is ignorant of the Under Empire / Skaven, or is that the case for other human civilizations, other species? That's a great question. That hilariously kind of depends on the author. Sometimes a lot of the other human kingdoms are like, oh yeah, they very openly know who the Skaven are. Like Talea is often portrayed as they know exactly what the Skaven are. Bretonia heavily depends on the author, where some authors will have the Bretonians know exactly what the Skaven are. They're like, oh yeah, we know these guys. They're these horrible rat men. They cause, like, they boil up, and we know they're not beastmen. We don't know a lot about them, but we know there's something unique and distinct. Whereas other authors will portray Bretonia as being the exact same as the Empire, where they think they're just weird rat-headed beastmen. The Empire is the only one that I would say is very consistently portrayed as denying the existence of the Skaven. All of the other human civilizations, it's a lot more wishy-washy.
Yeah, this is one of the less well-written aspects of Warhammer, and various writers have come in after other writers have written stuff and attempted to patch it, because the core conceit of the Skaven, as it is presented, is that they are an unknown species in general. But every story where they're used, they're bouncing around like mental, jumping from the rooftops, throwing stars around, throwing poison wind globes, going to war, giant armies swooping across the landscape. The idea that they're not known is often stupid. So it's just stupid.
Yeah, if you see a warp lightning cannon as a soldier, you're gonna go, that's probably not beastmen.
Yeah, quite. And the idea that Manfred Skaven Slayer becoming Manfred Ratslayer over time becomes a thing. And they've attempted to reinforce it, for example, by having great workings of Ulgu spilling out from Skaven Blight that tries to protect them. So using magic to say Skaven doesn't exist,
that one's fun.
Which is pointless in many respects, because at that point, the Civil War, Skaven haven't been seen for centuries. It literally does nothing. It's at the point the great spells going on, it's not needed. So the writers kind of did a back to front fixing there. And generally, the story is that the Skaven actively pursue those who openly discuss them. It's as simple as that, which means that they are one of the best kept secrets of the Empire. So loads of people in the Empire are aware of the Skaven, but the general populace just isn't. And that's because the Skaven assassinate people who talk about them. They threaten, they cajole. They are actually a part of the Empire society, as much as that may sound weird, because they are interacting with and directly influencing it. So I'd say that is probably your strongest example of how it works.
Yeah, and I would say one of the things the Empire does well, in my opinion, the Empire lore, is the idea that there are factions on both sides that don't want the average person knowing about the Skaven, where there are good guys who don't want people to know about the Skaven because they think it's just going to cause a mass panic. Everyone's going to lose their fucking minds, and it might spur the Skaven into action if the Skaven realize everyone knows they're there. And then on the Skaven side, they think the best card that they can have in the equation is not to be known. So you have people working at it from both sides, which makes for a really fun, compelling story, and also explains why people who talk about them tend to disappear.
Totally. And it works really well that in Skaven Blight, where you're at the very heart, the center of Skavendom, and we have all of our Grey Seers, Grey Seer Councils, all the rest of it. That's where our magic spells are being worked, because Skaven Blight is above ground. It's right in the center of marshes. It used to be. It's very detectable and very findable. That being hidden by sorceress and not necessarily just magic, but magical artifacts and similar completely makes sense. You can imagine horrible dark pylons rising out from the Skaven Blight marshes, all around, protecting that area to ensure that the various Myrmidian influenced Tillians and Astalians et al. Don't attack it. That makes sense, but requiring that for the entire Empire just feels like a oh, the writers fucked up, I'll just cover it with a bit of magic. Yeah, it was magic. Yeah, that seems a bit weak. But having a complicated society where some know, some don't, the Skaven try to kill those that speak about them. It's just all push and shove. And over time, because the Skaven plans tend to be surprisingly slow. And by that I mean, you'll often find that things will happen, they'll fail, and they will withdraw for often centuries before they rise back up again. Even though they themselves, the Skaven, will repopulate at an exceedingly swift pace.
They spend a hilarious 100 years playing the blame game, despite the fact most of them live for only like 6 before they die of old age.
Absolutely. And they go to massive war as the various almost immortal creatures that are leading them at the top go to war with each other, and they ignore the rest of the world. So because of that, they can easily pass out of all conscious memory. Easily. I mean, how much do we truly understand about what happened 200 years ago in the real world? Most of it's in our history books, and we all know it's deeply fallible. And we keep finding extra stuff that makes everything go, oh, maybe it was this way instead, or
like think about how many people unironically in our world are like, oh well, yeah, the Holocaust never happened, obviously. Like even though it's like, bro, we have like pictures and videos and stuff, like people were there who are still alive. Like think about that. Skaven play very heavily into those concepts. As I will say, to answer your very specific question, depends heavily on the authors, but generally speaking, Bretonia tends to be on the Skaven aren't real side of the spectrum. Estalia and Talea tend to be the most heavily on the we know what the Skaven are and we deal with them frequently.
Especially Talea. And especially Miraglanio.
Yeah, and I would say that although they haven't delved deep into it yet, I would expect that Grand Cathay would actually probably be in the we deny the Skaven exist officially perspective from the way they work, where you have like a secret group of people that deal with them, but the general populace is left ignorant.
Yeah, and I think that's the case. I mean, that's definitely the case for the Empire, because most of the ranking officials of the Empire are aware of the Skaven in some fashion or another. Not by any stretch all, but most of the Elector counts kind of are. Most of those who are making conscious decisions at the top tier for the major city-states, they kind of are.
A lot of the colleges of magic. No.
Yeah. And many of them are bribed. Many of them are told to shut up. Many of them are fully aware, and then they try to spread the word and die. And that is also known. So there's that conscious awareness that, yeah, we know that they exist, but we don't mess with them. Because if we don't mess with them, this is the big secret with the Skaven. They kind of don't mess with you. They very, very rarely do something that actually has significance, like boiling up in Nuln and trying to take over the city. It's like almost a once-in-a-generational event until you hit End Times time, which is pretty much where most of the Warhammer novels are spaced. So we have loads of events.
Lots of happening all at once. Yeah.
Indeed, yes.
And I want to say Kislev is very much in a similar ballpark as the Empire, where like the people in the know and everyone else is left mostly ignorant.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's generally the case.
Yeah. And it also makes for really good, compelling stories, and also allows the Skaven to function and still make sense. And it allows Talea to feel really like special, which is great as well. Doom Rider. So Screech is a literal rat king in a soul sense. Yes, that he is literally a rat king. Yes. Hence his last name. Chris 898. Are there human worshippers of the Horned Rat? Could there be a Verminlord representing them? Is there any lore and interaction with humans and rat demons? First question, yes. Yellowfang cult, really famous. They show up in quite a few different roleplay supplements. Could there be a Verminlord representing them? That's a genius question.
Yeah, and this is where you start discussing comparative theologies and exactly what gods are, where do they come from, and in some respects you have to answer different questions before you can really answer this one. But loosely, your answers are there human worshippers of the Horned Rat? Yes, absolutely. Across the world, you've got to remember that the vast majority of the Under Empire is a slave-driven empire, and they have species of all kinds there effectively grinding their mills. For want of a better description, they're like the Roman Empire in more ways than many people realize. And the slave populations of the Skaven are large, and they are, in general, forced to worship the Horned Rat. The Horned Rat is a part of their existence. So the answer is absolutely, definitively yes. But would there be a Verminlord for them? I'm going to suggest the answer is definitively no, because they are not Skaven. And the Verminlords literally are. The horned rat, like Skaven, not the other things. Now, could you make an argument that the humans and their mass worship somehow create some sort of weird entity that sits off to the side? I don't know, a Quethel Grizzlegut or some equivalent nonsense. The answer to that is, yeah, sure, you could go down those routes, but I think in some respects it almost undermines the unique nature of the Skaven and everything that they are, and also suggests that there's not, on the etheric side, quite real battles moving on from the push and the shove. I would probably say that most of, if you want to say the emotional energy of all that nonsense, would just go to the Verminlord, and they would treat the slaves like the scum they are. They have no representation, because that's what the Horned Rat is all about. So I would generally say, as much as it would be cool, probably not.
The thing that I will say is the idea that, because of one of the things the End Times really leans into, is that each of the Verminlords tends to have a very particular obsession that often defines them character-wise. The idea that there's a Verminlord among the Shadow Council of 13 or in the offskirts of it who is obsessed with humanity, and that is his obsession, their obsession, and that they have a scheme that very heavily relies on or revolves around humanity, you could work with that really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as one last part, which I do think is super fascinating, is there any lore on interaction with humans and rat demons? Now, specifically here, Verminlords, and the answer is interaction is generally at the receiving end of a glaive.
I was going to say, I can name one. He's implied to be dead, but I do know of a canonical one.
So I would say that given that they are etheric entities, they are summonable, which means that they could, with a demonologist, be accessed. They would be enormously stupid and enormously foolish, but I think the answer to that would probably be, contrary to my other one, yes.
Maximilian von Vodich.
Oh, I don't remember him. Who's that?
So he is from the Monstrous Arcana book, and he summoned
Arcanum, of course.
Summoned an exalted Verminlord into the Empire.
I'd forgotten about that. No, good call. And indeed, I mean, that makes absolute sense. That's the sort of thing that makes sense within the Warhammer demonic ecology, so to speak, where having Verminlords that would represent humanity absolutely doesn't. But I'm sure that someone out there could make a story where they thought it made sense.
Yeah, so if you want to have him show up in your roleplay campaign, you can, because it doesn't say what happens to him. All it says is that some witch hunters find his journal with blood on it in his house, and no one else is there. So whether or not he died or he went with the demon is up to you. Yeah, don't summon exalted demons, guys. It never works out well. Jonathan Scott, pitch us a concept for a lesser demon of the Great Horned Rat. So what I'll say here is that there are a lot of different angles you could take on it. I'm not going to lean too heavily into it, but because how lesser demons are made, depending on the god, changes. Where you have Nurgle, a lot of his lesser demons are literally mortal souls that get heavily corrupted by a magical disease that then makes them into demons. Whereas you have Tzeentch, where the horrors are these almost kind of mindless idiot creatures that are spawned all over the place, and they're just wild, chaotic representations of change.
Magic and change, yeah.
So there's a lesser demon is a wild category of how they're made and what they represent. And the Horned Rat, I think, would be no different. I will say the thing that jumps out at me in particular that I would probably run with, the idea that the Horned Rat was feeding Screech Vermin King the scraps of failed plots, I think is a really fun thing that you could run with. Of what if the very concept of schemes and plots could be manifested into an entity as lesser demons, where you have scraps of schemes and these deceitful moves and all these the thing that makes the Skaven brought to life and embodied in a way as these weird rat-like demons that represent all sorts of different kind of things that are happening. Because that would also allow you to divine what they're physically, what they would look like, and their character, what they would be trying to do, and that they're literally living embodiments of schemes and plots, whether successful or failed, which could make for some really interesting creatures. But that is just an idea I'm throwing at the wall.
And broadly speaking, yeah, sure. When you're building this sort of thing, I'm saying, yeah, sure, I think it's good. When you're building this sort of thing, you pull on your core themes, your motifs, the things that you want to try and represent. You would look at the Skaven as a whole and go, what are they? And then you would try to manifest everything that they are into these coalesced entities. And the obvious rat swarm would sit at the bottom as the least example of them, moving up towards some sort of scheming entities and tunneling entities and corruptive entities, corrosive ones perhaps. There's lots of different routes you could take. It's the sort of thing that, much like when we were working our way through what could the other various brothers of Tamarkan be when we did that on our Wednesday streams. This is the sort of thing where it needs more time than just a quick pitch, because if we do a quick pitch, it will be ultimately disappointing because we haven't really given it the thought that it requires. We'd be really looking to do something that completely manifested the Skaven in such a cool way that you're just left going, yeah, that feels satisfying. And
amen to that.
And I think that's something that the other Chaos Gods do pretty damn well.
Thank you for the super chat. Charles, in the Warhammer universe, are mundane animal rats inherently aligned with the horned rats, Skaven, and thus evilish, or are there non-aligned rats too? Okay, that's actually a really interesting question, because the answer is complicated, to put it bluntly. The Skaven do use sorcery that allows them to control and even spy through the senses of rats. However, you could very much argue that those rats are quite literally bred by the Skaven and are the rats that come up from like the undercities and stuff of the various settlements, as opposed to being just true natural rats out in the world. Because the answer is, I don't know if they particularly tackle this. The idea is kinda, but I would, if I were in a room and someone suggested that, I would say, I think the idea that every single rat is tied and influenced by the Great Horned Rat is ridiculous. I would say, no, absolutely not. I would ridiculous. I would say that's ridiculous. I would say it would be rats that specifically tie their lineage and their genealogy and everything back to the Skaven and to Skaven Blight, and they've just spread all over the fucking place.
Yeah, so the Horned Rat's favored creatures aren't rats. That's the first mistake. They're Skaven. That's the Horned Rat's favorite creatures. The Horned Rat's divine representatives, you could argue, are rats, in the same way that, for example, the divine representatives of Ulrich are wolves, or the divine representatives of Mor are crows. Does that mean that, not crows, pardon me, ravens. Does that mean that all ravens are holy to Mor? If you speak to a Morian, yes, they are. But does that mean that Mor's working through them all? No, they're just birds. They're just freaking birds. And in this case, it's exactly the same. They're just rats. Now, are they rats that Skaven will use? Are they rats that Skaven will eat? Are they rats that Skaven will keep as pets? Are they rats that will be X, Y, or Z? All of the above? Yes. Are some of them enormous, freaking mighty monsters? Yes. Are they all related to the Skaven? No. They're just rats. They're another species in the Warhammer world. It would be a little bit like saying, are all monkeys part of human plans and thus part of, the human gods? No, not really. They're just monkeys. And they are, evolutionarily very similar, and people like keeping monkeys sometimes. But I would say, generally speaking, absolutely not. It would, in some respects, diminish the Skaven as a whole and also make them bizarrely everywhere, which I don't think is the case. But that doesn't mean that any rat couldn't be plucked and used, or even found and used. But that's a very different affair. A wizard could do the same thing. If you've got a good old amber wizard, they could use any rat as their spy.
Yeah, so all that to say that if you're someone in the role-playing, because I know someone like this, and you have pet rats, and you're like, well, I would love my character to have a rat, but I don't want them to be a Skaven, you could do that.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Keep a very close eye on them, though.
They're not Skaven, it's just a rat.
Just a rat. Yep. Let's see. Old ones making a land of gods makes you wonder. Phil, I've always felt that Clan Scryer is the backbone of Skaven society. Heads and shoulders above the rest of the clans. It's just very hard to imagine a Skaven warren without Tesla coils spurting green bolts everywhere. They're behind most of their advanced tools of war, and their strongholds in the capital of the Empire. Is that a wrong assessment? I would say that because Clan Scryer is in Skaven Blight, they managed to grab that kind of like key territory, that they have a lot of influence and power within Skavendom, and a lot of their aesthetic, I would agree, a lot of their aesthetic is very popular as far as like, well, what do you think about when you think Skaven? A lot of people think of kind of that crazy Skaven tech. because that's a really fun, exciting aspect of it. If you explore a lot of the Skaven literature, there are a lot of times where you won't see anything scryer heavy, like at all. They'll just be like burrowing through tunnels, and all their buildings are just ramshackle wooden metal components, and there's nothing really crazy going on. It's all a lot more simple than you might expect. So they're not everywhere, but they do tend to get a lot of the focus because A, they're a very exotic aspect of the Skaven compared to all of the other great clans, and B, they're in the capital. So a lot of the times when you're dealing with Skaven stories, Skaven Blight will be involved in some fashion, and when Skaven Blight's involved, it's really easy to have Scryer involved.
Okay, I'm going to give a completely different angle for you to try and imagine this. Imagine Clan Scryer holding the copyright to all of this stuff. So, all of the various crazy pylons and everything, Clan Scryer, I'm throwing my wedding ring away there. Oops. Clan Scryer holds the copyright. Now, I know this sounds a bit daft, but run with me. I'll explain what I mean in a moment. So, they're the only ones who are supposed to be using that. But Skaven don't give a fuck about copyright. They never have done, which means that there's going to be a whole host of Skaven who are going, I don't care what you're doing, I'm going to use it myself. So in the same way, in the real world, Coca-Cola is by far the biggest Coke out there. It is. You think Coca-Cola, you say the word Coke, everyone's first thought is generally Coca-Cola. It's that red can. That is not the only place you can get Coke. Not only do we have Pepsi-Cola over there, and let's say Clan Scryer is both Pepsi and Coke together because they've pretty much cornered that market, but we have loads of cheaper alternatives everywhere. We also have various people who bought bits of Coke in, and they use Coke because that's what they use. Clan Scryer comes along and says, that's ours. And they're like, we'll fight you for it. It is a big, complicated mess. Just because Clan Scryer are responsible for the greatest workings, and they are the ones who hold the copyright and will almost certainly try to stop others from using what they consider to be theirs. That's a little bit like saying that only Clan Moulder can deal with beastie creature things. Only Clan Pestilence can deal with disease. All of that is just not true. All of the clans are intermixing, interusing, grabbing stuff from other people all over the place. Yes, the greatest warlock engineers come from Clan Scryer, but that does not mean that all of the greatest engineers come from Clan Scryer. There is a nice mixture of stuff going there.
Yeah, one of the things that's actually really interesting that to support that is like, take Clan Pestilence, for instance. In the Thankful book, one of the things they do that... So in Age of Sigmar, one of the things that kind of annoyed fantasy fans, but I understand why they did it, is that they do not refer to the clans as Clan Pestilence. It is Clans Pestilence.
Yeah.
Because it's not just, oh, we're Clan Pestilence, we're all in the same team, we're all in the same clan. It's no, Clan Pestilence in fantasy is actually supported by hundreds of smaller clans, many of whom are making their own plagues. Some of them are producing their own fanatical worship of that version of the Great Horned Rat. Some of them are just warlord clans that have been absorbed by Clan Pestilence, yada, yada, yada. Some of them are making monsters. Some of them are assassins. Some of them are tech geniuses. The great clans are not necessarily these gigantic, over-encompassing monstrosities that they kind of come off as, because it's like, oh, well, that's a single clan. It's really not. It's more of like they're the CEO of a giant corporation. They're like Disney, where like you think Disney, but what you're actually talking about is like a horrific amount of other things that you
Miramax and Pixar and all the rest of it
are actually owned by Disney. That's kind of what Clan Scryer is. They own a lot of stuff and things, but they're actually in reality made up by a whole bunch of fucking smaller things that are not necessarily even associated with them sometimes.
Yeah, we covered this to a degree in the Skrulk stream as well when we were discussing Clan Pestilence, and just how big Clan Pestilence got. And that wasn't because Clan Pestilence was one enormous clan, it's because it conquered all the others and it absorbed them while they maintained their individual clan beliefs. They were still clans. They were just conquered by Clan Pestilence, and they became, in many respects, the Clan's Pestilence.
Yeah, which is like, that's one of the few things that like, well, no, I wouldn't say few things, but that's one thing that AOS did that I think actually makes the Skaven easier to digest for casual readers, is changing it to Clans Scryer, Clans, Pestilence, etc.
And I think it's absolutely accurate to where it sits in the old world as well. So don't think that this is a uniquely Age of Sigmar thing that they've created. It very much is hinted at previously, particularly when you look at Clan Pestilence history, but it wasn't really codified in terms of how they presented the clan.
Yep. Commander Bones, so a lesser demon of the Great Horned Rat made of various types of schemes would be called schemers. Yeah, you can do that. That sounds fun. There would be tons of variants based on scheme types. If you wanted to run with that idea, I would say yes. But once again, that is literally just 2 seconds I spit at the wall. I would love to sit down and think on that for like 3 weeks and like talk to some other folks before I gave something that I felt was really concrete.
Yeah, and broadly speaking, Commander Born, I think that's definitely a start, although I would prefer not to simply call them schemers. For all that most of the lesser demons, greater demons, all the rest, tend to have names that are relatively on the nose. They do, a bloodletting.
Bloodletters,
a horror, or whatever
Plague
it might
bearers.
be. Yeah, quite. When it comes to the Skaven manifestations, you tend to find that most of them have got a name that is in some way related to that ratty vermin nature that they all have. So simply Schemer would probably be not what they'd call, particularly given that Skaven often prefer their double-barreled words as well. They're man things, not just men, pardon me. So I'd definitely say that that's a good start, but I'd probably try to embellish it further.
Yeah. Also because, you really want it to have a Skaven identity, whereas Schemer can almost come off as all kind of Zinchian as well. Sarmelian pet rats equals Skaven canaries. Freak out when a Skaven is near. That's an interesting concept. And I say
quite like
absolutely.
that.
I think that would work brilliantly.
Yeah, that's just a really nice idea, Sarmelian. I really like that.
That is a fucking cool concept for like a character that has a pet rat that freaks out when Skaven are near. That's good. That's
there's something
really
that
good.
quite like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, good job. I am probably going to use that for an NPC because that is a really... Oh, that's a fucking cool idea. Because the idea of like the Skaven can control rats, so like this rat can like almost sense itself being messed with and starts freaking out. Ooh. Phil, what is the significance of the Skaven? Oh, here's a great question actually. What is the significance of the Skaven's triangular symbol? I'm pretty sure I know the inspiration, but I don't believe I've ever heard an in-universe explanation for it. I don't actually know.
This is just running off my old memory. It's basically just the horned rat. Boink.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's just a rat face. But having said that, though, I'm not 100% sure, and I can't decide in my head whether that's something I've read. Certainly not something I've written, but it's something I've read or something that I have spoken to someone about, and they've said, "Oh, it's just that." I'm not sure which it is, so I wouldn't like to say that with authority, but I would like to say that's definitely what I think it is. Oh, that's really annoying me.
Yeah, that's actually funny. Armand, are Skaven populations affected by trends like clothing and or they like to have the new iPhone? And to what levels? Slave, the 13, the Great Horned Rat. Do the Skaven are affected by trends? Yes, 100%. They are heavily influenced by it. There's actually a lot of in-universe jokes that are really funny about it. A good example, one of my favorites. There is what's the word I'm looking for? Like agriculture, produce. There's a plant that is grown around Skaven Blight, which is black corn.
Wheat.
And the thing about it is that this black corn, or whatever you want to call it, is that there is a very rare selection of vegetables that can be grown in the marshes around Skaven Blight, and they always turn up black. But they can be grown and harvested and stuff, and it's horrible. But there's a really key amount of in-universe jokes in the Black Library books that there's a black corn that can come from around Skaven Blight, and Skaven will eat it because it shows off how incredibly wealthy you are to have gotten the black corn of Skaven Blight. Like it's hard to grow. It's only from Skaven Blight. But the joke is that it tastes fucking horrible. The Skaven hate it. It's like, it tastes disgusting. It's really unpleasant to eat, but they force themselves to eat it purely as a status symbol, which I find hilarious.
So the answer is broadly yes.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about Verminlord variants, just because I'm keeping an eye on time here. So
where are we? Cripes. You're right. Look at the time. Yeah, we are moving.
Fine. So, starting with, I want to start with the original, and then we'll kind of work our way forward because it kind of makes for an interesting thing. So you have the original Verminlord, the OG, where he's got this kind of skeletal head.
The OG.
Yeah, the really giant antler horns, the little spiral horns, which, like Andy said, funny enough, really do look like a really specific type of deer I can think of that I want to say is from out
of like a slightly amorphized deer.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's a South American deer or an African deer, but there's a deer that looks very similar to it. And he's got the really big glaive, which later gets like in 6th edition, no, 7th, gets called the Doom Glaive.
Doom Glaive. No, it's called Doom Glaive right in the very first iteration.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yep, the 4th edition, and it's got a big chunk of warpstone sitting on the far end. And I recall when I painted it, because I painted it like 12 times.
It's got a big old on the bottom.
It's got like some skulls hanging off chains on it as well, because why not?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about the Verminlords that actually we didn't bring up till just now, but something worth bringing up. One of the things I find fascinating is you would expect them to have rat feet, but many of them don't. They actually have cloven feet.
Cloven feet, which is interesting. They're very much drawing upon almost the old Satan style goat look. They're trying to almost draw upon the cloven creature with the big horns, and they do look kind of goaty.
Yeah, especially so not the later Verminlords, but the original one. Yeah, the original one kind of. If you look at it and you didn't know what it was, you go, "Oh, that's Satan." Like that's very obvious. Like he's got the head shape, he's got the horns, he's got the hooves. Like he looks like Satan. He just has a rat tail. And I'd be like, "Yeah, you're not wrong." Very Baphomet-y almost.
Yeah. And they're very medieval versions of what Satan may look like as well. Not the Satan as adversary or some equivalent use of the word that come before that. They're very medieval Christian.
Yeah. They're really like, I'm thinking of Satan the person, Satan the character, not the concept. But this changes dramatically in the Monstrous Arcanum, which came out during 8th edition and introduced the Exalted Verminlord, who's very different. A, gigantic model. He's fucking huge. B, he actually has rat feet, which is unique to him. He's the only Verminlord that has rat feet.
I don't know. The later model sort of looks kind of ratty with their claws.
Yeah, so they're a hybrid, but we'll get to them in a moment.
Yeah, kinda.
But
you could argue it.
Yeah, the Exalted Verminlord, the thing that they did with him that was very interesting is he's a chunky boy. He's fat. Like, he's very big. He's corpulent. He's a very heavy set looking lad. Almost like one of my favorite descriptions you've seen in a lot of fantasy things is like, it almost looks like someone that was really muscular at one point in their life, but they've kind of got lazy and a lot of that muscle's turned into fat and is pulling down on his skin. But it's this absolutely massive creature, and he does not have the traditional glaive. He wields a really big staff. And it really leans into the idea that these are they're great architects of scheming and plots. They're masterminds that prefer to kind of be a little further back and unleash really powerful sorceries as opposed to throwing themselves into combat, which is really interesting. And you see his influence on the Verminlords that are coming up in a moment.
I particularly liked this one and I particularly like this one because this one actually matches the description that came in the 4th edition far better than the model that we got later, because it's a far more heavier, thumpier warpstone inside it, scheming looking creature that's as I recall that one's sitting on a piece of scenery or something.
He's on a big arch.
It's separating itself from the battlefield. And it's looking down upon the battlefield. It is an entity that is watching, scheming, and working from the outside. It's by far, for me, one of the best of the Vermin. I mean, is it the best Verminlord model? I mean, I really quite like the one that came later too.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting, things that are interesting about him, just as a note, is that instead of a Doom glaive, he has a Dire glaive because while he does. He's got a big staff, but his staff makes the Skaven horned rat symbol. Here, I'll show you. He's got a really fun piece of artwork where you can see
he's literally got the warpstone kicking out of him. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, he's got warpstone just literally pouring out of his body. To the point, he even had a special rule where he has Withering Flame. He literally shoots Warflame out of his body as a shooting attack, not as a spell. He's very, very range heavy. Like, he's a boss in close combat. He's absolutely insane in close combat, but he has a lot of rules that benefit him being at a distance, which is really unique. So we move on from the Exalted Verminlord, which, of course, the note talks about. It's like, oh yeah, Verminlords are really big and scary stuff, but then there's another echelon. There's the rare Verminlords above the regular ones, who are like the big, nasty, super spooky ones, being these Exalted ones who actually, like Andy said, I agree, the Forge World guys did a brilliant job of taking the original description and actually making that model.
Yeah, the Forge World model matches the original description really closely, where they discuss this corpulent entity with the flesh sloughing off in places because it's also corruption. It's a manifestation of corruption. And the warpstone jutting out of it in multiple places, and Skaven runes embedded into its flesh in multiple areas, and a great staff. And the staff, I think, really does characterize it in a way that, for example, the glaive doesn't, because it supports the magic aspect. It gives you the idea that this is one of the most powerful spellcasters that you will get, because it's using a great staff, and we all know that staff means wizard. We've watched Gandalf. That pretty much means he's just a giant rat Gandalf.
Yeah.
So out comes the giant rat Gandalf, and he kicks ass.
Yeah, that bullshit staff does D6 multi-wounds. That's fucking it's bonkers.
It's nasty.
Goldoraz does I only think does D3+1. Like, damn.
If you're out there just now and you're sitting beside a screen and you've got an opportunity to go check it up, go look up the Exalted Verminlord now. Take a little look. I've just done it on this side. It's a great model, and is the one that I feel most closely matches it. You'll see that it's also had some influence upon some of the later Skaven Abomination style models, where they're just like big fleshy creatures. And you can see that in the Verminlord here, even though it's got relatively lean legs and muscled, relatively lean arms as well. It's a great model.
Yeah. And then that took us to the end times, where functionally we got one model, but the one model you could put different arm attachments and different heads. That's the big difference. The uniting features that are interesting is that we got split tails on all of them. So Verminlords universally get split tails, where their tails divide in two, and they're these really, really long barbed tails, as opposed to just the traditional rat tail. You also get that they go back to the cloven hooves, but they're more like a hybridization of rat claw and hoof. So they're like, they almost look like the ends of certain insects, like insect feet.
They do.
Because, and it's quite literal, you could tell they were like, well, we want them to have the cloven hoof, but we don't want it to just be regular cloven hooves. We want them to be ratty, which hilariously to me, it almost looks more like bug feet. But beyond that, they have the universal really big horns, though depending on which headset you go with, different the horns headsets. are Arconic. They have different matches. And then pretty much the universal aspect is that they're just very big. Now, when you read some of the background behind them, there's more details, but the models don't necessarily reflect this because, like I said, the models share bodies. So, for instance, my favorite version is the Verminlord Corruptor, which is the Pestilence version. And the idea with him is that he's got the two Plague Reapers there, which are these two little, like, they look like sickles, but they're like one-handed sickles instead of like the really big two-handed one that you normally think of. And what's interesting about the Corruptor is that his head is fleshless. He does not have any flesh. He's just an exposed skull. And when you read the background of it, they very much give the impression that if it wasn't sharing a kit, that its body would be falling apart. Like, it would be full of
corpulent
wounds.
And big and sloughing flesh off, and it'd be horrible. Very Nurgle-esque.
Yeah, like it would look horrible. Actually, you know what? I don't know if I would agree that it would be corpulent. I think it would be very withered and famine-ish, as opposed to maybe a bloated corpse. I think they would go more of the I think they would deliberately want to separate the Nurgle aspect a little more and be like, we're going to go more with like the withering away kind of pestilence instead of the
they kind of have that bloated. They're plague bearers, although they do have bloated bellies.
Yeah. But the thing about him, interestingly, is that he's fast, which is unusual. Well, it's not unusual because actually one of the fun things about Lord Skrulk is like freakishly quick. And they lean into that here as well, where the Clan Pestilence Verminlord is actually the fastest one, tied with the Eshin one, which not a lot of people would necessarily think. And his model, although I love it, I will say that it is a model that if you use and you want it to really be pestilency, you have to green stuff the shit out of it because he's very clean. He's very, very like clean. Like he's got the exposed skull, but other than that, he's got the same ripped 6-pack furry body that the other Verminlords have, which just doesn't fit him very well. Because like I agree with Andy that this is one of those scenarios where I understand whether they went multi-kit, and they're beautiful kits. They're gorgeous. But it sacrifices a lot of the character in the name of efficiency, which is kind of a shame. I don't hate it. It's just a choice, I guess is the best way I can put it. But the Corruptors do represent the pestilential aspect. They're the most pestilential of the Verminlords. Where they walk, corruption is seeping around them. The air around them literally weeps and bleeds with corruption and withering and plague of we get these scenes of one of them going through Lustria, and the jungle around him is literally rotting away into these black piles of like mulch, and it's just this horrible creature roaming through reality, just plaguing, diseasing everything around him, literally able to vomit like this horrible effluvia that can melt down anything that runs into it. I love their depiction of the lore, but the mini is a little weak for what they're trying to tell.
Actually, I'm going to support and be perhaps blunter. I thought the model was great for a single Verminlord, but didn't feel anywhere near as Verminlordy as what came before. I just re-looked it up again just to refresh myself with it. I've only painted this one once. And for a single Verminlord, it was fine. It very much leaned on the original model for a lot of its inspiration, which is good because we always like to see the old stuff manifest in a new way, but the descriptions that it has going along with it kind of just don't match the kit, and that is almost across the board. If we take, for example, the Verminlord Deceiver, which is your Clanesian version, who's got himself his warp stiletto, which I don't think I will ever get over. I think it's a stupid name.
It's a stupid name. It's cool looking weapon, but it's a stupid name.
And his Doom Star, which is basically just he's throwing another star. This one should be right down on all fours, creeping along, skulking the shadows, long cloaks trailing, tails lifting up with weapons wrapped around like the ultimate expression of a Skaven assassin. This is the one that should have had weapon skill 10, that should have had initiative 10, should have been the super fast one. But you tend to find that the way they dealt with it wasn't through changing their stats. They just gave them a couple of different special rules. But the model in no way reflects it. In no way really gives you an idea of this. What is a Verminlord who is the ultimate assassin?
Once again, I will say, AOS, they are so different. Like, each of them is so different from each other, it's not even funny. Their stat lines are wildly different in AOS.
And it's exactly how they should be, which is way cool.
And in fantasy, they suffered heavily. I will say, I love the giant throwing star that when you actually think about it, it's like the size of a... It's like the size of a dude on a horse. I love that stupid thing.
Particularly because it's got a rule where it takes out the entire front rank by itself. As it goes fling, as it goes woo, slices all the heads off. Super cool.
For me personally, I actually think the best versions for the design they went with is the Warpseer and the Warbringer. The Warbringer... Yeah, the Warbringer is the Warlord one. And the thing that's nice about him is that because of the various arm bits and the head bit, he has armor. Like, he actually is wearing notable pieces of armor, and his little belt piece is even heavily armored. So it's like, oh, okay, this guy's actually wearing armor. You could tell that he's a general, that he's a fighter. He's got the punch dagger, which is a kick-ass looking weapon on the Verminlord, where he's got an armored gauntlet that's got a big old set of spikes coming out of it. And then he's got the very iconic Doom Glaive, which is now a double-ended glaive. So it's a glaive on both ends of the weapon. And he very much looks the part. He's got like a big chunk of warpstone in his helmet.
Awesome.
The design they went with leans well into them. He's got Skaven symbols carved into his flesh, and he looks like a big spooky general. He's very like, he comes off as, oh, this Verminlord would be very open. He would be out, like, he's your almost quick head taker character where he exalts in violence. And although, like Andy said, he does fall back. He's not like a bloodthirster where he throws himself in and just fights till he dies. He hits more strategically than that because he's a little cowardly, but he's ultimately a frontline fighter. And the model is very much a like, oh, look at me type design, which is why it's kind of sucks for the Eshin Verminlord.
Yeah, agreed completely. I think it's ace, and it just looks cool. There's no other way of putting it. It's the Verminlord that makes sense for that. It's almost like this is the Verminlord of this, and none of the rest of them actually got their models. Although I kind of agree that the Warpseer also has quite a lot of character. All the horns. Oh.
Yeah, and Screech looks great. Like Screech Vermin King looks awesome. He got a lot of really fun little bits. But then you, of course, you have the Warpseer, which the Warpseer is actually kind of a fun character because he also has the iconic Doomglaive, but in his hand he's got this Doom Sphere type weapon. And the funny thing about it is this weapon is bizarre in that what it is that it allows him to kind of see the future. So it gives him like bonuses to his saves and everything, which made him a very popular version for the end times because he had a 4-up board save instead of a 5-up board save, which is very nice. And it also made his sorcery more powerful. But then it has this goofy ass secondary rule where he's looking into it, it shows him the future and it empowers the spell, but then he can throw it at someone as a last resort, fuck you. And it's basically a brass orb on steroids. Where if he sucks. If he throws it at you, if you get unlucky, which is it's actually a difficult weapon to avoid. If he hits you with it, which is likely, you basically just get sucked into the realm of ruin and die instantly. Which fuck. First of all, second of all, it's a really fun model of that. He's just looking into this orb that he's got positioned in front of his face, and this model was quite interesting because he definitely comes off as the Gray Seer Verminlord as opposed to like one of the greater clans. Which I will say, I don't know why they made the decision they did to go with. So you think, for Verminlord, so it must be one for each of the great clans, and that's not actually what they did. Instead, they went Eshin, Pestilence, and then Greyseer and Warlord, which was a really weird decision.
It's a choice to me.
Because everyone's like, well, what about Molder and Scryer? And they're like, oh.
No. Particularly, there's, I think, one other thing that's definitely worth reiterating to make sure that this settles down and you get it in the back of your head. Because when you think of the Warlord clan version of the Verminlord, your first thought is this great, mighty, massive, huge Verminlord with his mighty double-ended glaive and his big, huge, massive punch dagger. It's not a dagger, it's like a punch person. It's enormous. And you get that idea, and it's easy to forget that he's also one of the most powerful spellcasters in the game. And that is a lovely combination that you don't often get, particularly with Chaos, where they go, here's the most powerful close combat thing, and pretty much across the board and all of it, the most powerful close combat thing is rarely also a spellcaster. And even when they are, they tend to dial it down. Not so here. He is literally top tier and kicks ass. So that's definitely worth noting.
Yeah, the thing, literally, he is technically the worst wizard of that particular group. But the only reason is because each of them, so as part of their special rules, like Andy said, they don't get made that different.
Yeah, quite. They don't.
The one thing that makes him slightly different from his fellows is that each of them got given a different spell that they're like really good at. So instead of them casting it normally, they have some like bonuses to cast it. And for him, it's Death Frenzy. Whereas for like Eshin, it's Skitterleap, or for the Corruptor, it's Plague, which, like, holy fuck. So big Plague.
Not good.
Yeah. And then for the Warpseer, it's Warp Lightning, which is, a very dependable spell, but also not like super high tier. And then Screech Verminting comes in from fucking downtown with the steel chair with his buff dreaded 13th, because he's Screech fucking Vermin King. But it's interesting. The Verminlords are one of those things that don't get me wrong, I genuinely love the AOS models. But frankly, I kind of agree with Andy that when you really think about the way the Verminlords are talked about and like described in fantasy, that Forge World kind of killed it.
They did.
Like
I'd love a combo of the two if you could get one. It's just the Forge World one just gives you that feeling of an old, calculating, powerful entity that's sitting over
he truly
and
is
watching
exalted.
Down. Yeah, absolutely. It's a proper exalted model. I really like it. And I think it is, of all the Verminlord models, by far, and I do mean by far, the most superior. Because it epitomizes the character more than the others, where they just tend to go for our big giant deer that's covered in muscles. Let's fight! and doesn't necessarily match the descriptions. I think it works really, really well for the Warbringer, but for the rest of them, meh.
Yeah, granted, I will say relatively easy to fix. Just use green stuff, and you can actually fix them quite easily. Because adding to a model is always much easier than the opposite. Get the chisel out. So those are all of the variants that we got introduced to as actual tabletop models. There are, of course, variants that exist beyond that. Like they have been very open within the end times, and especially with the AOS, that there are Verminlords beyond just the 4 types that exist now, where there are Verminlords that delve into flesh crafting, and there are Verminlords that delve into technology and things like that. And there's a very heavy suggestion one of those might be coming out soon. But it's very, very it's interesting how they very much have kind of leaned into the idea being that they are similar as creatures, separated more by the weapons they wield than anything else because of the models. Which is it's one of the few time, not few, but it's a time that you see some limitations based on how they wanted to sell a kit influencing a design structure, which is rare, but it does happen.
Yeah, and for those of us who are watching just how it was built, because they all have the same stats, that was not needed, by the way. They had 4 separate pages to stat these up in 4 separate ways. 5 if you include, obviously, our Rat King. We have 5 separate ways we could stat this. They statted it identically across the board. And it shows a certain lack of imagination when it comes to building each of them. If our, for example, Clanation equivalent, our Deceiver version of our Verminlord, had stats that were much faster, much more stealthy than, for example, our Warrior one, who is all about kicking ass, chewing gum, and using his weapon skill. Or, for example, well, our Clanation one would also be using ballistic skill as well, so popping that one up. Moving over to our Seer with a completely different setup, with magic being our core component, and possibly some technological aspects to it as well. That would have made a super nice and fun different set of Verminlords, still using that same one model. So I'm obviously not the greatest fan of the end times. I love that they significantly developed the Verminlords. I really don't love that they spent 5 pages giving us something that could have been on a single page. Just one. One page would have covered all of this with ease. And it could easily have been 5 pages of unique entities that just made us go, Verminlords rock! And the description suggests they do. The stats and the way they're actually used suggest they don't. Yes.
So, Andy, this next super chat just blew my mind, and I think you're going to love it.
Oh, I love super chats that blow your mind.
Could there be a Vermin Queen of the Breeder Skaven? A nightmarish Verminlord of the Breeder, the Rat Mothers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that should be something that occurs. I once attempted to convert something like this, and I failed because it looks shit. Bluntly, it just looked bad because I'm not a sculptor. It just looked terrible. And I just sort of pushed that aside and pretended it never happened. But it's definitely something that sits in the back of my mind as something that would occur. We don't generally see female Skaven because the female Skaven are generally the great breeders, and they're a very different type of creature to what we imagine Skaven to look like. They just are different. We'll perhaps do a Skaven stream discussing those at some later date.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But I think the idea of not having female Skaven represented with both that and possibly other places too. I did this in Lorehammer, for example, where there was a Grey Seer, a female Grey Seer in there. And that was, I remember getting the comments at the time, that just blew people's minds. But that's absolutely within the setting. If you are born a Grey Seer, it doesn't matter what sex you are, you're a Grey Seer. That's it. Now, you're going to be one hell of a different Grey Seer to the same core model we see every time on the battlefield, but that's cool because that starts adding variety and interest and in no way contradicts the background. And I think that some form of Vermin Queen would be just cool
and you want to talk about
and ugly and awesome.
A corpulent Verminlord would, the Vermin Queen would be a fan. That would be I would be the guy in the room that would be like, that absolutely fucking disgusting Tyranid model that's got like the gaunts pouring out of its orifices? let's do that, but a Vermin Queen.
I imagine there's some horrible thing over in the Kingdom Death model range that would probably do relatively well. Not that I've got any of those, but I have heard. And there's some pretty mental models over there in Kingdom Death. And I'm sure we could convert something over there nowadays. But yes, I think that is a great idea. And it's something that I not only support, I would kind of like to see happen.
Yeah, because I mean, just thinking about the Verminlord taking like the most favored breeders, the breeders that have produced the most like just the best of the best Skaven, the Verminlord ascending them to make this horrible monstrosity that births demons now is like, oh my god.
Yeah, and the demons that it births and the stories you could tell with that, I think it's a character. There's a character there.
Yeah, that
could be super cool.
Like that, man. If they did that as like another model up there with Screech Vermin King, I would be all in for that.
Yep,
like
agreed.
I know the Vermin King. I want to know about the Vermin Queen now.
Mm-hmm.
Morton Crescent, Verminlord seem amazing to use as Warhammer Fantasy roleplay villains with schemes upon schemes. If you made a Verminlord in the game, how in character would it be to have them support the PCs, much to the PCs' genuine horror and upsetness?
Absolutely. Indeed, I would go further on this and say that one of the great mistakes that people generally make when they play Warhammer Fantasy roleplay in general is making the bad guys and the good guys good guys. Warhammer is a complicated game full of shades of grey and shades of other colours also that make it complicated, meaning that sometimes your allies are your worst enemies and sometimes your worst enemies are your allies, or at least that's how it should be. Take a look at the core campaign that is presented in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, that's the Enemy Within. And in the Enemy Within, it's all about the Empire fracturing and falling apart, which means that many of your enemies are nothing more than other people. That's it. They're just other people. Now, the cultists, the big bad cultists that might be behind it, indeed, they're also bad. But there's also, as we know, chaos fights amongst itself. There's cultists that want to stop that from happening. So they become unexpected allies. And it becomes more complicated the more you look at it. And absolutely, when it comes to something like a Verminlord, its schemes are enormously complicated, and always, generally speaking, to ensure that the Skaven come out on top in one fashion or another. And that will mean that sometimes not only do you need to support other factions, which may be human, maybe otherwise, that they need to be actively supported. And I think that that makes for fun, interesting plot lines. Also, in terms of novels, makes for fun, interesting plot lines when perhaps your mysterious mentor or some equivalent turns out to be the very thing that you're trying to bring down, or you might be working for the bad guy all along, and those make for, if handled well, super fun plot lines.
Yeah, just to put it in a very nice, easy perspective, my personal Warhammer Fantasy roleplay campaign that I am a player in on Sundays after Lorebeards, we made the big mistake of thinking that every chaos thing is therefore bad. And we killed a Tzeentch character who, because we killed him, resulted in the explosion of a city. Where if we had not killed him, he would have stopped it.
Yeah.
because it wasn't part of his plans. And we goofed. We goofed big time.
and similarly in Lawhammer, the game that obviously I'm running online, quite literally the event that's just occurred. The event that has just occurred and everybody's waiting on tenterhooks to see what happens next, because explosive isn't in any way a good description. It's big and it's bad. It wouldn't have happened if the PCs had failed.
Yeah, that
So because the PCs succeeded, that happened. Because the bad guy they were trying to stop would have stopped it from happening. And that in itself is brilliant. It only happened because the bad guy failed. And mixing up these things is what makes this sort of stuff fun.
Yeah, biggest thing I can always say to people is, like, all of your supporters should not be good guys. Like, remember, chaos has a lot of enemies, being other chaos, Skaven, the undead. They all have their own schemes and things, and many of them will help you, whether you like it or not.
Absolutely. And not only that, people get mistaken frequently in games like Warhammer, and Verminlords are the perfect characters to be working on that behind the scenes.
Yep. Forcehammer, do you think the Kana's Uncoder ever had a chance to wipe out the Skaven? realistically, no. The closest anyone ever got was the closest anyone ever got was the Skaven nearly wiped themselves out because the Slann moved the continents a little bit and it caused a Skaven machine to blow up, and literally all the Skaven almost died because they didn't have proper OSHA in place for their Doomsday engine, and they nearly killed themselves. And that's literally the closest anyone ever got.
Yeah, so let's just keep it nice and simple. The Karazhan Corps is spread through the mountains. The Skaven are much further than that and underground. The Karazhan Corps has been in retreat for thousands of years. The Skaven, they just haven't. Even when they're at their lowest, there's still uncounted millions of them teaming away, warring with themselves. Yeah, billions.
Ain't
billions
no way
of
billions.
them. Yeah, you're right. Uncounted billions of them scheming away, doing their crazy stuff, warring amongst themselves. There's too many, and no matter how many they wipe out, they resurge back so much faster. Their life cycles are so short and turn around so quickly. Their litters are so large, they literally can't wipe them out fast enough. They are literal rats in the system. Can you think of a single city that has managed to wipe out its rat problem? And if you can, I'll be impressed.
Yeah, I want to say it was Guy Haley that wrote one of my favorite quotes from the end times, where he says canonically that there are 1 billion times 1 billion Skaven, which that's a big number. That's a big fucking number.
Maybe a bit big.
Like, you look at that and go, holy fuck, that's a lot, right?
That reminds me of one of the numbers where it said something in the region of gave a bunch of 1 in every 1,000 has so much magic ability. 1 in every 1,000 of those has so much, and then 1 in every 1,000 of those is a battle magister in the Empire. When you actually add the numbers up, it means that there are no battle magisters in the Empire because there's just not enough people in the Empire to get even one. Someone didn't do their maths.
I agree, and I will tell you, I have never been more proud and also enraged by a single person's decision in my life.
Again, this is, for those of you who don't know what he's referencing there, he's bringing up a comment about what just happened in the very recent Warhammer episodes, where it was special.
Yep. But that, we are pretty much out of time. The Verminlords, the Verminlords are a really, really fascinating case. They are one of those things that, while we know, it's interesting. It feels like we know a lot about them, but if I were to sit down and actually write about things that I would like to know about them, that list would be significantly larger. Of the case of that, especially as we talked about in the first half of the stream, that they are, by most definitions, demon princes, but they don't act like demon princes. There are some really weird implications going on with how they act, how they exist. Their extreme fears of mortality, despite the fact they're not supposed to be mortal, that open up a lot of really fascinating cans of worms that leave room for exploration. These are questions I don't necessarily think should be answered, but they just make for really interesting storytelling. I've got to make time this week to go pick up the new edition of AOS because I'm really curious about what the new Skaven stuff is, seeing as they're the big bad guys for this edition.
Yep.
But Andy, you got any closing thoughts for us?
Yeah, so the Verminlord. The Verminlord for me was revolutionary because up until it was released, and we're talking properly codified in the Warhammer 4th edition of the game, demons were the province of chaos alone. That was it. They didn't come from anywhere else. You got your demons from chaos. And the army lists of the time very much nailed that in place until along came the Skaven and they said, yeah, we've got our own greater demon too. And our greater demon is pretty freaking awesome. And indeed he was. He combined the best stats, as is often the case with greater demons, all into one thing, and a 4th level magic user. There's only 4 levels in Warhammer with +1 if you got a special magic item for most of the editions. And I remember it coming out and going, that's awesome, because it opened up the world. It showed that not only were the great 4 chaos powers the only province of demons and possibly lesser chaos gods, anything that was aligned to chaos in one fashion or another could have its own deity representation on table. And that opened things up significantly. When I came to later be writing about these things, the Verminlord was a core component of manifesting other gods and understanding how they worked. So it influenced me significantly as we then move on to the later editions, where the Verminlord gets repitched as what was originally just a demon prince into not a demon prince at all of the Skaven, but a demon of the Horned Rat. And then later on, finally, past its exalted version into the edition that we have in the end times, where we've got an entity that is probably a demon prince, but not necessarily. We have greater demons of the Horned Rat that scheme and twist and coil and are in all ways representative of the Skaven, which means that they held many of the same fears, but to the much higher peak. They are much better manipulators all the way up there, much better schemers, much better wizards, much better corruptors, much better everything, because that's what greater demons are like. And they are terrifying. I remember when the 6th edition of the game came out, I was convinced we were going to lose them forever, and I felt that was sad, because I had played with them all the way back in the 1st edition of Advanced Hero Quest, which effectively became Warhammer Quest later. And I loved that whole story with the crazy amulet of Salkin and the crazy greater demon of the Skaven. And the idea that that has lasted all the way through to the very end of the Warhammer world, for me, is just the best. And I personally wish they had just done something better with them at the end, because they had pages that they put aside to them, and they ultimately made them bland. For all the description was the opposite. The description was everything we were hoping for, but the actual representation of them in the end was kind of not.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, they are, quite frankly, the best aspect of Book 4 of the End Times. The Verminlord characters are fantastic. Like, they are scheming motherfuckers, and they're scheming against one another, against the various factions of the End Times, and they are obscenely powerful. They did not fuck around with the writing for the book, thankful. Like, the first time I read it, I actually hated them because I felt they were grossly overpowered. But in retrospect, it makes them really, really fun characters that feel far more dramatic. And the fact that there are so many of them running around really makes it feel like the apocalypse, because one of them is really bad, and there's like 6 of them kicking around in that particular story thread. And the other thing I will note that's actually really just a fun addition for those that care is that if you were worried, the Exalted Verminlord was not actually retconned out of existence like the kind of... it is still its own unique thing. It still gets rules. It still has like... it's technically called legend support, but it's like acknowledged as a canonical aspect of the setting still. That Mini is, and the Exalted Verminlord being its own separate thing from the 4 main variants. Which is fun and good, because as you heard me and Andy talking about, we really like a lot of aspects of that design, because it stands out really, really well. But I believe that is pretty much us for today. If there's any kind of last comments. Oh my god. Oh yeah, I was trying not to burst out laughing during your exit, because I read the Verminlord was sure many people's furry awakenings. God, I hope not.
I mean, each to their own.
I don't know. I feel like if someone sees a Verminlord, the first thing they think is like, yeah. It's like, yeah, you need to go. You need to get out. Like,
each to their own.
No. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining us. We do hope that you had a good time. Please do remember that we will be back on Wednesday on the Lawhammer channel at 6 p.m. CST, 11 a.m. BST to do a tier list for the various provinces of the Empire, and we'll include Marienburg just for fun. But beyond
Westerland.
Westerland.
The wasteland.
And then next Sunday, we will be talking about... Oh, wow, I'm actually kind of shocked. Next Sunday, we're going to be talking about Black Crag.
I know, I didn't expect that one to win. I'm really pleased with it.
Why Black Crag? That is so weird. All right, whatever. But okay, cool.
No, I'm looking forward to that one. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, there will be a new poll up on my channel as soon as the stream's over with. And we will have the lobbies open for the Black Crag stream and the tier list stream here very, very soon as well. So, I believe, unless you've got anything else, Andy?
I don't, other than just simply say thanks and go buy Dark Deeds. It's shipping from the US offices right now.
Oh, I need to check my email. I bet I have an email about that.
I hope it's been sent. If it's not...
Well, I'll go check. So, yeah, thank you all again. We will see you on Wednesday, hopefully, and if not, hopefully next Sunday. Until then, take care, be safe, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.